1 year ago, around this time, I was bored and scrolling the web, nothing unusual for me, and I decided to go on Omegle. Omegle was a now shut down website that allowed you to talk to strangers via video or text chat. It was around for a long time, and I used it frequently when I was younger as a bit of a time waster. There were plenty of creeps on there, sure, but I've had an equal amount of pleasant interactions and conversations on the site too. On Omegle, you could type in tags as well, basically keywords that describe the type of conversation or person you're looking for, and you would match someone with the same ones. I always used alt for alternative. I feel like it weeded out a lot of rude people, I suppose, and connected me to more people my age. For reference too, I was 19 at the time. So, I connected with someone who called himself Kane, and we started chatting via text. He said that he was 23, and I said my age back. We exchanged some small talk, and before I knew it, we were pretty much talking all night. I mean, well, all night in fact. We lived in the same time zone, you see, and I had stayed up until 6 a.m. chatting about philosophy and life and our interests, just because he was entertaining and I was having fun. But when we were talking about our general areas that we live in, he then said abruptly, we should meet up sometime. I laughed initially, but it turns out that he was actually serious, and it also turns out that we only lived like 3 to 4 hours away from each other, so he was really considering this. I am an anxiety-ridden person though, but for whatever reason I thought that he might be normal due to the fact that I just spent hours and hours talking to him, and I didn't pick up on any red flags. So I said, sure, why the heck not? I know, this is an incredibly stupid mistake. I have a big heart though, and frequently make the mistake of giving others the benefit of the doubt. So, just like that, we started planning a camping trip. He was set on doing it just days after that morning because that was when he was off work next. I agreed because I didn't have anything to do at the time. I asked for his number so that we could talk somewhere else other than Omegle about the trip. He gave it to me and I texted it, and noticed that the message showed green on my iPhone. This indicated that he was using a Samsung or an Android. Teasingly, I said something along the lines of, "What's up with the Samsung?" After a few minutes, he texted back, saying that he had 2 phones and that one was for work. That was the first red flag that went off in my head. Why would he need 2 phones for work at his age? I mean, of course, there's possible reasons, I suppose, but it just set off that intuitive feeling, I guess. One that I regret not listening to in the end. I asked what the job was, and he said that he worked for the state. He added that he isn't allowed to share details about his job because he signed papers saying that he wouldn't, and that he could get fired if he were to violate his agreement. I was still wary of this, but I just figured that he must have worked for a police station or the town council or something to do with law enforcement or something, and that I was probably just overthinking it. Well, days passed and the date for our camping trip approached quickly. He wanted to take me someplace close to where he lives, near a mountain in New York. By the way, don't worry, this isn't near my actual house at all. Obviously, I wanted to do at least a little research about where I was going, so I popped the name into Google. A bunch of results popped up about the soil on the mountain being contaminated with arsenic due to the old mines in the area. All of the government and the state articles that I read said that it was still safe to hike there and that you should wash your skin and shoes after hiking. I still had a feeling of unease about the whole thing, I guess. I texted Kane and asked him why we were going to some place that could potentially be dangerous. He assured me that nothing would happen, and said that he chose the spot because it's somewhere him and his friends frequently camp. This slightly reassured me, I suppose. He does know the area better than me, after all. Now, my parents are definitely over-suspicious of everyone. Strict is also a safe word. For good reason, though. They're just protective, I guess. So I told them that I was meeting up with a friend that I'd met over a video game, and that I'd already known him for a month. I knew this would be less likely to freak them out than the truth, and they were adamant that this was a horrible idea, but finally let me go off when Kane pulled into my driveway. he didn't come inside and waited outside of his car for me. After a brief introduction, my mum rushed out to meet him and asked a few questions about the area that we were headed to, and then we were off. We pulled into the Starbucks by my house so that he could get a coffee, since he was tired from the drive up there. We sat in his car for about maybe an hour and a half afterwards, and during that time he asked me to rate the playlist that he put on, and showed me how he writes down every single song that he likes in a little notebook that he kept in his car. I thought that was a bit weird, but kind of sweet as well. Like, what guy these days writes down songs, right? After an hour or so passed, though, I told him that we should get going so that we can get to the campsite before dark. He kept saying just 5 more minutes, though, and after about 30 minutes of insisting that we need to leave to make it on time, he finally let us start on the road. While we drove the 4 hours up to our destination, Kane mostly talked about himself. He told me long stories about his friends and a girl that he used to date that he doesn't like. I thought that this was a bit strange. Who talks about another woman to a girl like this? After telling stories for about 2 hours, I tried to deviate to a brighter topic and ask what kind of things that he's into, hobby-wise. I already knew the stuff that he told me online, but I was trying not to suffer from awkward silence or any more of his weird ramblings. He said that he thinks that eating healthy is important, and that people who eat junk food are stupid. He also says that he only wears sustainable clothing that's made from cotton or wool. I don't have a problem with being sustainable at all, but he was saying it in a really sort of, obnoxious way, I guess. Then he turned to me and asked the first question about me since we had gotten into the car. What brought you to Omegle? I told him that I was bored and that I like meeting new and interesting people, and that was about it. He nodded slowly and thought and grinned, showing the most expression that I've seen on his face so far. He said that he likes to go on Omegle and tell people that he's a soldier in Russia, and that he was torturing people as he spoke to them. I sat there in silence and just kind of stared at him, waiting for him to say that he was just kidding, and that it was just some sort of messed up humor. But he didn't. He just laughed and said, "What?" Well, as we neared the campsite, I mentioned that I was getting kind of hungry. He said that we can stop at Whole Foods before going to camp for the night. In my head, I sighed about this, knowing that he was probably going to judge me for whatever I picked out there, but it wasn't a problem for me and I was hungry, so I agreed. In Whole Foods, he made me pay for both of our meals because his card wouldn't work there. He didn't even try, in fact. This annoyed me, I'll admit, but I was just eager to get to camp, so I paid and we sat down outside to eat. After about maybe an hour, we were finally ready to get to camp, so we drive up the mountain and he pulls into a small parking area with about 3 spots. Cars were parked there and older men were surrounding the car smoking some weed. Nothing they were doing was wrong, at least morally, to me. But it just made me uncomfortable that they were there so late at night. Before I could even mention it though, Kane says that it's too cold for him to carry our supplies to the campsite, which was about a 10-minute walk, and set up camp. I was taken aback by this. I said, "What do you mean? I'll help you. We didn't come up here for nothing." He insisted though and told me to get out of the car and to feel how cold it was. He said it would take a while to pitch our tent and that it was too much for us. Now, there was no way that I was getting out of the car and facing the men in the parking spot next to us, so I rolled down the window halfway and stuck my hand out. It was freezing, he was right about that. That night it was in the 30s and the wind chill felt worse being higher up. I was annoyed though, but I agreed in the end to sleeping in his car for the night. I was sad that our trip was basically wasted, to be honest, but it was the best that we could do. He sat in silence for a while, seemingly uncomfortable that I was annoyed and unsure how to comfort me. I slinked back into the passenger seat and started to scroll on social media, just trying to pass the time. He grabbed my phone out of my hand and said, "Come here." He patted his lap. I was already annoyed at the situation and confused on what he thought he was doing. I said, "You're funny," and reached for my phone that he had tossed onto the floor of the car. Before I could get to it though, he reached over and scooped me out of my seat and tossed me onto the back seat. Now, I don't remember most of it, but my eyes were squeezed shut and I was just praying for it to end. After he was done, he pushed me back into the seats and got dressed. He smiled at me and said, "How was it?" I just stared back at him with tears in my eyes. He climbed back into the front seat, propped his feet up on the wheel, and then he just went to sleep. I didn't know what to do. I sat there motionless in the back seat for about 2 hours trying to process what had just happened to me. I considered calling my mum, calling 911. I thought about it for what felt like forever. I already had been assaulted once in my life, and it broke my parents' hearts. I knew that learning of this would absolutely destroy them, and I was also afraid of what would happen if I actually told them. Like, I didn't want my dad or my brother to go to jail for life because they were angry and got revenge against this guy. So I just sat there all night, watching the men outside stare into the car and smoke on their joints. I don't remember falling asleep, but eventually I woke up to the wind hitting the car. I was in a fetal position, sitting upright, holding my legs in my arms. Kane noticed that I was awake and said that it was time to go. I was actually scared of him, and it felt like my heart was leaping out of my throat. Adrenaline was pumping through my body, and I started scanning the back seat and our overnight bags for something that I could use as a weapon in case he were to pursue me again. I ended up holding onto my full metal water bottle, and it wasn't deadly by any means, but it could knock someone out, and holding it made me feel safer. That much was for sure. I stayed in the back and Kane started driving. I asked where we were going, and he said to get breakfast. Almost as if that was obvious, and it was silly of me to ask. After driving down the mountain back into the city, we pulled into a parking garage and he tells me to get out, that we're here. I get out of the car and cling close to it, not wanting to let him get behind me. I was thinking about making a run for it, honestly, but didn't want to risk getting chased and overpowered by him again. I followed him to a little Mexican spot on the corner and he told me to order pancakes so that he could have some. This obviously ticked me off even more than I already was, but I didn't say anything because I was afraid that there would be consequences if I showed negative emotions at this point. I ate a few bites of my food and he happily ate the rest of my plate. He paid quickly with cash and took me back to the car, where he lay down in the back seat. He said that he was going to take a nap because he didn't sleep well last night. I didn't want to argue with him, so I let him sleep. And he slept for about 3 hours. The whole time I was watching YouTube videos trying to calm myself down and keep a clear head. It was about 9 a.m. and around this time my mum was waking up and texted me saying that she wants me to be home. I told her that Kane was taking a nap and that I would be home soon. She didn't like the sound of that and insisted that I come home now. I was happy to have a reason to get the heck out of there, to be honest, one that might be convincing to Kane too. So I woke him up and he became angry with me, saying, "Don't wake me up next time. Play on your phone, watch TikTok or something." I was shaking, but I managed to say that my mum wanted me home and that we needed to go. He said to let him sleep for 30 more minutes and told me to set a timer on my phone, and so I did. 30 minutes though felt like 30 hours, and once it went off, I woke him up once again. This time I filmed myself waking him up because I was afraid of what was going to happen. He was angry once again, and I told him that 30 minutes was up. I asked to leave, begged him to leave in the end, and he said no. Over and over, he said that we weren't leaving yet. I was now shaking uncontrollably, but I put on a brave face and pretended like I was being playful. I said, "Okay, I'll just get an Uber then." I turned around and started to open the car door when I felt his hand grab my shoulder and dig into it, yanking me back into my place. I honestly think that I blacked out from fear for a few seconds. He said, "What the heck are you doing?" His hand was still on my shoulder, his fingers squeezing into my skin. My mind was racing and I was on the verge of tears. This caught his eye and I quickly played it off by saying that my mum would call the police to come and get me if I wasn't home soon. I had mentioned earlier that my dad works in law enforcement, so this was a little bit more believable of a lie, I guess. And at the mention of police, something changed in his face. He looked frantic. He let go of me and unhappily agreed to drive me home. I felt a deep relief, the deepest relief that I've ever felt, and swallowed the lump in my throat as he climbed into the front seat and started our 5-hour drive back to my house. The drive back was much quieter than the drive up. I didn't say anything unless he initiated. I just gripped my phone in my hand and tried not to make eye contact with him. I wondered if he had any remorse for what he did in those moments. When we reached the town where I live, it was about 11:30 at night. Kane pulled into the main strip to get to my house, and I saw flashing lights behind me. Honestly, my first instinct was to be scared because my dad is a cop, and so I've always made extra sure not to break any traffic rules. The police pulled us over, though, and 2 men stepped out of the cop car. I frantically rolled down my window so that they could see my familiar face, the daughter of their boss. One of them greeted me and looked both concerned and disappointed that I was in the car with someone getting pulled over. The other cop told Kane to get out of the car while I explained what we were doing out so late. Obviously, I spared the illegal and horrific details. I was tired, scared, and I needed to be safe in my own home. I also didn't want them waking up my sleeping dad with such bad news. I overheard the second officer ask Kane about his information, though, when he said, "What's your name, son?" Kane mumbled something and he said to speak up. The name that he gave was not Kane, though, and he told the officer that he was 22, not 23. My heart sank into my feet, and I sat there motionless while they explained to Kane that he had missed a stop sign and that they were letting him off with a warning. They told me to get home, and I nodded my head. When we pulled off, I let my emotions take over, and I started screaming at the stranger that I was sitting next to. "Why did you lie to me? What is wrong with you?" He looked distressed from the volume of my yelling and told me to calm down, that he was sorry that he lied. He said that he only lied about his identity for his own safety. That honestly baffled me, considering that he had just assaulted me. I screamed at him all the way to my house, and as we pulled in, I threw the car doors open and started throwing my stuff out onto the lawn, desperate to just get far away from him now. He tried to talk to me, to offer more pitiful excuses for his disgusting actions, but I screamed at him to get away from me and that I never wanted to see him again. I gathered my stuff off the lawn and hauled it into my room while my parents slept soundly, unaware of the terrible secret that I had. I eventually woke my mother up and told her that I was home as she had requested. Once I got to my room, though, I just broke down. What happened to me was starting to sink in. As I was sobbing silently into my blanket, my phone lit up from a text from Kane, and it read, "I'm sorry about what happened, I really am. If it makes you feel any better, I just got pulled over, so that's my karma, I guess. Let me know if you want to talk." I felt a wave of nausea hit me like a train. I screenshotted the message, blocked his number, and deleted his contact. And I haven't heard from him since then. In fact, I haven't hung out with anyone since then besides my boyfriend, who, thank God, is normal. I still think about what happened almost every day, though, and I still feel sick when someone I don't know gets too close to me, even if it's just a stranger passing by in the grocery store. I know that what happened was the product of my own irrational teenage actions. I get that. I know that I shouldn't have met up with someone that I didn't know, but I had faith that he would be a normal person, somewhat at least. I wish that I could have listened to my instinct and to my parents' warnings. I still don't know what would have happened if I didn't make up that police story, and to be honest, I really don't want to even think about that. I'll never meet up with someone again that I don't know, though, and while trying to cope with what had happened to me, I eventually Googled the mountain again, and I found a link that said Cane Mountain North Trail Loop, New York. Now, if you've made it this far, or you're taking anything away from this story, then please let it be this. Trust your instincts and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, then it probably is. And obviously, don't meet up with strangers, no matter how good they look or how normal they may seem. So I fell out of contact with my brother about 15 years ago due to how my parents are. We recently got back into contact and started catching up, and before getting into this, I should probably let you know that I have a love for the paranormal, and my brother thinks that it's all fake, or at least did until we got to talking about the room that we both inhabited at one point or another. So the house that we lived in was old, built sometime in the 40s, and was renovated several times before my parents got it. It was a 2-bedroom, but one of the bedrooms was also the path to the bathroom, and it was the kids' room, since the parents wanted the privacy of the other room. My brother was out of the house in 2001 after he graduated, and I got the room afterward. A long story short, my parents made the dining room their bedroom until my brother left, and was genuinely unsettled all of my childhood because of the things that I saw there. This is just the setup to the mutual experience, but I had to get that out. So one night when I was 14, I saw a man much taller than my father standing in the doorway of my room. I was frozen in bed, unable to make out what it could have been. I actually asked if it was my father, but it slowly moved out of view, and my dad is a bit of a jerk, and I had recently gotten into trouble for sneaking a horror movie that I don't remember the name of, and figured that he wanted to just scare me out of ever doing it again, and so I went back to sleep. The following morning, I asked if it was him, and he replied that it wasn't, and both him and my mother both looked a little shaken when I told them. I saw it twice more in my life, but figured that it must have been my overactive imagination, and so I just pushed it out. Cut to this year though, and I told my brother about it, and when I did, he went pale and silent for a moment, before telling me that he had seen the figure as well, back when he lived in that room as a younger teen, and he also had some of the similar frights that I had over the years, like a mirror incident, and when I asked my parents, they finally admitted to having seen the man as well at one point, but figured that it was just exhaustion. That house had a list of bizarre things happen in it, but I just wanted to share this one experience that was verified by multiple people. When I was a kid, we lived in a small, isolated house on the edge of a half-developed neighborhood. There were only about 6 houses on our block, and ours was the last one before many overgrown weeds and empty land stretched out into the dark. At night, the area was deserted, and you'd rarely see anyone stepping outside. I lived there from the ages of 7 to 13, and looking back, it felt like I was trapped inside one of those disturbing, uncanny horror films where reality always seems just a little bit off. Now, before I dive into the incidents, it's worth mentioning that our life in that house was filled with a sense of suffocating dread. Financially, we struggled a lot during those years, drowning in debt. Strangely enough, things turned around for us as soon as we moved out. Family fights erupted daily, and I remember feeling terrified constantly. I remember not going too far into any room so that if anything jumps out, I could run through the door easily. I don't know why I did that, to be honest, but it's just how I felt. But here are some of the events that made me believe that something was definitely haunting us. So, I remember staying home from school one day because I was sick. I was curled up on the couch watching Barney and Friends, trying to distract myself from the eerie feeling of the house. At some point, I felt someone standing beside me though. I assumed it was my mum joining me to watch the show, so I didn't think much of it. A few minutes passed and I casually asked her something. There was no response. I asked her one more time and there was no response again, so I turned around to find that nobody was there. But that was when it hit me. My mum wasn't even home and she had left for work hours ago, and I was completely alone in that house. This freaked me out, and I opened the front door and sat on the porch until my parents came home because it just felt that real. It felt like someone was actually there right next to me. This next incident happened to my sister, but I'll explain it from my perspective. We all used to sleep in the same room since our house only had one bedroom, and me and my sister would sleep in between my parents to feel safe. One night, my sister was studying for her test in the living room, and maybe around 12:30 in the morning, I was starting to fall asleep when suddenly my sister busts through the door running and jumped onto the bed scared and was crying. After calming her down, she told us what had happened to her. Apparently she was in the living room studying for a test when, out of nowhere, a yellow ball with a smiley face on it rolled to the hallway from the other room, and as it came to a stop, dozens of cockroaches scurried out from the same room, like they do when they hear humans walking. Our house had a serious cockroach problem, by the way. The floors practically came alive with them at night. She said, though, that a heavy sense of dread washed over her as she stared into that dark hallway. Then she saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, moving in a way that made her feel cold all over. She also told us that she felt stuck for a second and froze in fear before she ran into the bedroom, and that's when we met her. On another occasion, one morning, my dad couldn't find his glasses. He had recently undergone cataract surgery, so they were pretty essential. The whole family spent what felt like hours and hours scouring every inch of that house. We checked his shelf multiple times, which was where he usually kept them, but they were just nowhere to be found. Eventually, we left for school defeated and convinced that the glasses were gone for good. But later that evening, as we were sitting around, my dad suddenly called out to my mum, sounding almost angry. We rushed over to find the glasses sitting right there on the shelf, exactly where we had checked over and over again. My dad thought that we were playing a prank on him, but I can assure you that we weren't. Really, there was just no explanation for how they could have reappeared like that, and it wasn't him pranking us either because he was so mad that day. Now, this next one is actually pretty scary. How would you feel if a random creepy-looking guy stood in front of your house and just started chanting? Well, in South Indian culture, there is such a figure. I've not heard much about them, but they are like devotees of God who roam the streets and just sort of randomly tell fortunes to people, but most people avoid them, fearing that his predictions might bring misfortune. My first encounter with one of them, though, was when I was young. I remember hearing a man singing some kind of a religious song near our doorstep, like literally a few meters away from our door. And so obviously I went to check on it, but my mum quickly grabbed me from the back and told me to be silent and to not make any sound. We pretended like there was nobody home, and eventually he must have gone away. But I was really confused and asked my mum who he was, but she didn't explain and just sort of brushed it off. Well, years later, as the strange happenings in our house grew more intense, a similar figure began appearing near our house while my dad was home alone. For several days, this man stood near our door chanting and seemingly delivering cryptic messages at night. Finally, my dad confronted him, telling him to stay away. I never did see that man again after that, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was somehow connected to the disturbances going on in this place. My sister also had recurring nightmares while we lived there. She remembers one in particular, though, that absolutely terrified her. She would wake up to a vivid vision of a figure, like a yogi or a mystic, sitting on her chest, chanting in an unknown language. She could feel his weight pressing down on her, making it almost impossible to breathe. This vision plagued her as well until we left that house for good. We eventually moved out of that place, and to our relief, the strange experiences almost entirely stopped. Our financial situation improved, the family conflicts became less frequent, and that constant creeping fear seemed to finally lift. I cannot explain what was happening in that house, but living there always felt like I was stuck in a disturbing horror film, one that I desperately wanted to escape. So, my question for all of you guys is, what do you think? Was this place haunted, or was it just the atmosphere of that place getting to us? There are some more stories from that place, and if you would like to hear them, then I'm okay with sharing them, I suppose. So do let me know, because there are plenty more. Can you name every single subscription that you have? I know I can't name all of mine, and I'm not alone too. I just learned that over 74% of people have subscriptions that they've forgotten about. But with Rocket Money, I don't have to remember every subscription or worry about forgetting any, because I can see them all laid out right in front of me. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money's dashboard gives you a clear view of your expenses across all of your accounts. Easily create a personalized budget with custom categories to help keep your spending on track. See your monthly spending trends in each category to know exactly where your money is going. Get alerts if bills increase in price, there's unusual spending activity, or if you're close to going over budget. The new goals feature automatically saves money for you without you having to think about it. Whether your goal is to pay off credit card debt, put away money for a house, or just build your savings, Rocket Money makes it easy. And I've saved my own fair share of cash using Rocket Money to cancel a few subscriptions that I didn't even remember that I had. One of which was a D&D map-making subscription that I'd forgotten about and was still paying for on a monthly basis. Finding this certainly made me question too whether or not I had other subscriptions that I had forgotten about, and it was nice to finally have that peace of mind too that I wasn't forgetting anything any longer. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you, sometimes by up to 20%. They automatically scan your bills to find opportunities to save, then you can ask them to negotiate for you, and they will deal with the customer service. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancelled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So, stop wasting money on things that you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/scared. That's rocketmoney.com/scared. rocketmoney.com/scared. I worked in a jail for over 10 years in the control booth running doors, cameras, radios, phones, you name it. I still work for the agency that runs it, but I no longer work at the jail. But I saw and heard a lot of stuff. Most of it was non-paranormal stuff, but you would often hear like strange noises and banging. Usually it was an inmate or door noises, but the side of the basement where the staff locker and the weight rooms are is admittedly creepy, and I often felt watched when I was down there by something other than the cameras. I've heard a couple of stories from trustees saying that they saw a black shape of a person standing in an empty cell or wet footprints in the kitchen when no one had been in there all night. Our IT tech also claims to have caught EVPs while in the jail, but I haven't heard them, so I cannot confirm either way. But I have two stories that have always stuck with me, one from a coworker and one that happened while I was there. So one night my coworker answered the phone, and it was a mother calling about her son. She gave his name and her name and said that her son had just been arrested for driving under the influence and she wanted to bail him out. But my coworker explained that her son hadn't arrived at the jail yet and would have to go through the booking process before he could get bailed out. My coworker explained to her how to bail him out and where the jail was, to give the jail a call a little bit later to get an update. She asked that he let her son know that she was going to bail him out though. The son was eventually brought in by the arresting officer, and my coworker had a correction officer pass on to him that his mum was bailing him out. My coworker listened to and watched the entire exchange between the son and the officer as the officer told him the message. The son was shocked though and stated loudly, "No, she's not. You're messing with me." The officer said, "I know my guy, he wouldn't mess around with you like this." But then the son said, "My mum is dead." They then confirmed the mother's name with the son, and it was the name given by the woman on the phone. My coworker swears up and down, though, that he talked with the woman saying that she was his mum. The man would not be on the roster yet, but it could have been someone who heard his name called over the police radio, or someone who was with him at the time who was trying to mess with him, I suppose. On another occasion, my story happened not long before I left the jail. So a few years before the incident I'm talking about occurred, a man had unfortunately self-deleted himself in one of the cells. The night that I'm talking about, one of the officers was doing his regular check of the units and came up to the cell the man was in a few years before. And the man that we had housed there was sitting up on his bed, facing the door which has a window. He had a blank look on his face and his eyes were open wide. He looked the officer straight in the eyes and said, "You couldn't find the man who had self-deleted in time, and you won't find me in time either." The man was brought down to a cell where he could be monitored, and we went from there. The officer said, though, that he had to yell and shake him to get him to respond, as if he was waking him up from a sleep. He was asked later what he knew about that cell, or if he knew the man that he had named, and he said that he didn't, and claimed that he didn't even remember saying anything. And yes, the officer in this story was working the night that the man had unfortunately ended his own life. So I haven't had any remarkable experiences of my own, but I'm certainly not a disbeliever either. I have a 5-year-old son. His dad, myself, and him will often stay over at my father-in-law's house, as my father lives across the street, and my brother-in-law lives in the house behind that yard. My brother-in-law has a 2-year-old boy, who my son plays with every time that we're there. They're very close. His name is D, and D goes home around 8 to get ready for bed. He's never out at dark or by himself, and for backstory, this house has a bit of a, I guess you could say, vibe to it. I won't say bad, but it seems to bring out bad emotions for people who are frequently there. So much so that my father-in-law's late fiancée succumbed to her poor mental health in a fiery way in that home, and my boyfriend and I will find ourselves angry and fighting at night there too. Not typical or over any real things. Not typical or over any real things either. This is also common for everyone who visits or has stayed there. Certainly not bad enough that we don't come around or anything, but what my son heard may just change that, at least at night. You see, a couple of nights ago while staying the night, about an hour or two after D had already went home, my son stops playing and starts running to the door, saying that D is here. I just heard him say my name. When we told him that D was at home and in bed, my son said, "No, I just heard him yell my name. He wants me to go and play with him." There was absolutely nobody else but my son and my boyfriend in that house, and we didn't hear anything at all. For how close the call he had heard came from, we should have heard it too. D is very excited over my son and is quite loud when hollering for him, and my son was genuinely confused when we verified that D was at home asleep. So, could this have been something trying to mimic D to lure my son, or just a 5-year-old boy's imagination? He seemed very convinced that somebody had called him. It definitely put a chill down our spines. Back in 2020, at the tail end of the major part of the pandemic, I decided to take my family on a trip to Gettysburg, PA. I love history and love reading everything about the Civil War, and Gettysburg is supposed to be a very haunted place, so you would expect to see things out in the battlefield, cemeteries, and old buildings and all that. The following happened at our hotel. Upon checking into our hotel, I had asked the hotel about laundry facilities, as we didn't arrive directly to Gettysburg but landed in Richmond and did a bunch of battlefields along the way. So by the time that we arrived in Gettysburg, we needed to wash some clothes. I tend to pack pretty light, like bring enough clothes for half the trip, but then I do a wash midway. And since this trip was mainly for me and my son, my wife was like, "No, you're doing the laundry." Her way of making me pay for a boring trip for her, I guess. That, and I had to buy her lots of pretty things along the way. Anyway, this evening we got back to our hotel rather late in the evening. I had asked the hotel if it was still okay to do laundry, as there was a sign that said no laundry after I think 8 p.m. or something like that. The woman at the front desk said that there was no one staying in the rooms near the laundry room. I had to run back to the room to gather my laundry and then again back to the front desk because I ran out of quarters. So by the time that I started laundry, it was well past 9 p.m. The hotel had one set of washer and dryer there, so rather than run back over to my room, I was looking up things to do the next day and looking at my phone and watching some videos. I had my body facing the washer and dryer, so off to my left-hand side was the interior hallway that led to the other rooms and the double doors to the outside. The noise from the washer was a bit loud when you were in the room. Then when I had my clothes in the dryer and washer, it was even more loud. I was only paying attention to my phone, not looking down the hallway, however, and I had heard a door open and close. I didn't look and just assumed that someone was there down the hallway. Off to the side of my view, though, I saw a shadow walking towards me from the very end of the other hallway, so I poked my head up and turned to look down the hallway, totally expecting to see another guest or maybe a hotel employee or something. But as I turned, there was no one there. I just assumed that maybe they went into a room. I thought in my head, though, that the hotel told me that nobody was staying near the laundry room, but in the main part of the hotel. You also need a hotel keycard to get in from the outside, so it wouldn't have been a random person off the street or anything. In any case, I just go back to looking at my phone. I turn facing the washer and dryer, not paying attention down the hallway anymore. A few minutes later, I then hear a loud boom come from down the hallway. It sort of sounded like metal poles falling over or something. I then jump up and look down the hallway, but I see nothing again. My load that was in the dryer is finished now, so I'm putting that load in a trash bag and putting the load from the washer into the dryer. As I'm doing this, I see again somebody down the hallway off to the side of my eyes. So I turn and the lights look dim down the hallway, but there's no one there. At that, I started to feel very uneasy, as if someone was looking at me. I have to wait another 30 minutes or so for this load to finish. I started to not face the washer and the dryer anymore, but face down the hallway, a little bit freaked out. I can't tell if my eyes are playing tricks on me, or maybe if I'm just a little bit tired from the trip or what, but I keep expecting someone to just pop out or jump out and attack me. I go out into the hallway to make sure that there actually isn't anybody there. I look around and it's just an empty hallway. The outer doors leading to this part of the hotel are closed too. As soon as my load finishes, though, I start packing it in another trash bag. I'm in full get the heck out of here mode. Now that all the machines are off and I can hear clearly, I pack my stuff up and start to head out. And just as I get to the door leading to the outside, I distinctly hear footsteps. I turn thinking that somebody is walking up on me, but again, there is no one there. I leave that wing of the hotel and I make it back to the lobby and then back to my room. My wife looks at me like, "What happened to you?" I said, "Well, I totally believe all those stories about Gettysburg being haunted now because that was an experience." So, some important context first. Paul was a longtime friend of one of my parents. It seemed like around the time that this all started, he stopped taking his medication. I actually had no idea about his disorder prior to the beginning of this whole situation too. This has been ongoing for almost 2 years now. I also live with my parents and sibling. So early 2023, Paul shows up at our house and appears to be on drugs. Police are called and after a while he's driven home. His friend, my dad Ron, goes to Paul's house to check on him, finds his meds, notices that he's not himself, witnesses him hitting his cat, is also not feeding it properly. And here's where things get a little bit tricky. I'll admit that this is where we went wrong. Okay, so imagine your best friend of many years has a debilitating mental illness, stops taking their meds, beats their pet, and you think, hey, until they get back on their meds, I'm going to take their pet because I love my friend and I don't want them to hurt the animal that they obviously love when on their meds. This was a bad idea, because even in that circumstance, you are not allowed to just take somebody else's pet. We love this cat and we tried to make the best decision for him and his cat at the time. Following this though, hundreds of texts sent to both parents, very angry and scary ramblings. Eventually, I get some texts as well, lots of Facebook posts calling us the villains. We try to look into getting him admitted into a psych ward. It doesn't work out because he's an adult and they can't force him to stay. Sends a friend to try and break into our house in broad daylight, right after we changed the locks because he threatened this prior. By now, we have a caseworker who we've explained the situation to. He understands but says that it's not worth the struggle and suggests a mediated returning of Paul's pet. We do this despite being worried for the cat's well-being. Ironically too, he texts me after the fact saying that we were right to take his cat. I wish I still had this message, but I think I blocked him over text at some point and cannot find it now. You think it's over? Well, think again. Side note too, the amount of text that we were getting during this time was actually insane. They were all very angry, implied and even outright stated some very scary stuff. Additionally, many of the texts that we would get or posts made to scare and defame us were very jumbled and not well written, which seems to be par for the course for someone with schizophrenia, according to our caseworker at least. The new problem though? Well, when you're friends with someone for over 20 years, you gift them things, they gift you things. That is also true about Paul and Ron's friendship. Exactly a year after this happened, I get a text with some very colorful language asking for his stuff back. I don't respond because that's what I've been instructed to do. This past week, we have had 2 letters drilled, not taped or pasted, onto our back door within the span of a few weeks. This is the first time between contact since the very start of this ordeal, and the letters were threatening, scrawled in big harsh lettering, and this is what pushed me to share this here. So when this initially became a problem, the police told us all to cut contact and to never interact with him for any reason, even to give borrowed and gifted stuff back. I'm starting to think that that was a bad idea though. Do we just give the stuff that we know that we were lent back? The main item being asked for is something that we don't even have anymore. I don't believe that somebody in this state of mind can be reasoned with, but I don't know, maybe they can? For the past year, I've had this constant lingering anxiety, and honestly, I'm just sort of sick of it. I'm sharing this here because I just cannot think of any good outcome from anything that we try to do to resolve this situation. He knows where we live. He has means to support himself without working, seems to act normal when the situation calls for it. Maybe people with schizophrenia or people who know others with the disorder can chime in here because honestly, I'm just scared. We do have means of defending ourselves if need be. We're getting a porch camera, but I kind of just feel like I'm waiting around for the situation to escalate at this stage. I'm scared of the unpredictability of someone with that disorder. We've contacted the police, but they basically can't do anything. We just don't meet the criteria to file for a report online. This happened sometime in 2013 when I was 19. I had my room in the basement in my dad's house. It was late at night and I laid there on my bed in complete darkness like I always did. I needed to sleep because I had school the next day, but I suffered from insomnia back then and felt too energetic to fall asleep. I laid there for a good while with thoughts swirling around in my mind like I always did when I suddenly heard some kind of noise. I opened my eyes, but as I mentioned before, it was completely dark. I started to think that I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, a scratching sound. From there it went on, getting more and more intense, and I quickly realized the noise was coming from underneath my bed. My eyes widened and panic spread throughout my body. It sounded as if someone was frantically clawing on the floor. Did I leave one of the cats in here before I went to bed, I thought, trying everything to rationalize the situation. But I already knew not even a cat could make that kind of a noise. Then, that's when I felt something, like a scratching and a punching against my back from underneath my mattress. The best way that I can describe the whole thing is to imagine some poor soul being trapped inside of a coffin, desperately trying to break out, and I was on top of that coffin. Well, I was paralyzed by the shock of it all, not knowing what to do. After I had been laying there for a good while with the scratching and the punching still going on, my fear eventually turned into some kind of rage. I jumped out of bed, ran across the room and turned on the lights. Then I threw myself on the floor, looked under the bed and yelled, "What do you want from me?" But when I did, nothing was there. The scratching, it had stopped and there was nobody else in the room except for me. Somehow I managed to fall asleep eventually after that experience, and a couple of months later, a friend of mine from school moved into our house. She rented a room from my dad on the top floor. After she had been there for about 3 nights, she came to me in the morning and said that she had the craziest thing happen to her during the night. I could almost feel my skin turn pale as she told me the story of the exact same thing that had happened to me. The scratching, the punching against the mattress. I knew for certain that I had never told her about my experience, and we were both really freaked out when I told her the exact same thing had happened to me 2 floors down, months earlier. When I was 11, I was walking the 4 blocks to the JCC by my house and meeting my 2 best friends who were sisters, D and B. I was walking and feeling relaxed because I'd walked to the J a million times before. I started walking past a small empty office building, and that's when I noticed a dark car idling way in the back. The car had tinted windows, and the driver rolled down his window and said that I was very beautiful and asked if I modeled. He had sunglasses and a baseball cap on. He also had a salt and pepper sort of red beard. He looked like he was in his 30s or maybe 40s. I said yes, and he asked if he could take my pictures. I stupidly told him my plans to meet B and D. He said that he could tell that I'd modeled, and I was getting more creeped out by his behavior. He continued to talk to me and then even took a couple of photos of me. As he continued to talk to me, I suddenly got a bit of a bad feeling. My heart suddenly dropped into my stomach. I remembered what my parents said about not talking to any strangers, and all my alarms were suddenly going off. He slightly moved his car, and that terrified me. He asked me to come over so that he could get better pictures. I was now hyper aware of everything that was going on. I told him that I had to meet my mum, which was different from what I'd told him earlier, but I didn't even think of that because I was so terrified. He kept trying to get me to go closer to his car, and I saw a mum watering her lawn and said that she was my mum, and I broke off in a sprint all the way home. I was shaking and crying by the time that I got home, and I told my mum, and she took me to the police station. To my shock, D and B were actually there too, because he'd gone to the JCC where I said that I was meeting them. He took their pictures, which they thought was actually funny at the time, but we did a police sketch and found out that there was another girl that he had taken pictures of, and, terrifyingly, had tried to take her too. They unfortunately never did catch the guy, and that scares me a lot, thinking about the fact that this guy is out there on the loose. I'll preface this with saying that I've never had a paranormal experience until this night. This happened around 4 years ago, and I was 25, I'm male, and ever since this experience, I've had an altered perception of the afterlife, multiple dimensions, and what our reality may be. So I was up late one night laying in bed, close to 2 in the morning. I'm laying down and my cat at the time was laying in between my legs, fast asleep. I'm scrolling on my phone when all of a sudden my cat awakes and is staring at the stairwell that is the entrance to my basement bedroom. My cat starts to growl deeply and puffs up a bit, in classic cat fashion. He then starts to back up towards me as he is still facing and growling in the direction of the stairs. Meanwhile, I'm thoroughly creeped the heck out and frozen in fear. I'm sitting up in bed at this point, and my cat is now backed up fully into my stomach, while growling, mind you. He hisses for the first time, and as he did, I had this sensation of an ice-cold chill move directly over my body and through me, as if it was a blanket of cold air that had enveloped me. Chills went throughout my whole body, and this feeling was utterly, for a lack of a better word, disgusting. Out loud, I murmured, "Oh no," and then I proceeded to grab my cat and carry him upstairs to another bedroom to finally sleep. Now this is where it gets even stranger. You see, I spoke with my mum the following day after she was home from work. I told her the entire story and that I was thoroughly creeped out. And unbeknownst to me, my mother had been at a funeral the previous day, and she mentioned that when she was driving home from the cemetery, that it felt like someone was in the car with her. Originally, she thought that it may have been a family member coming to visit from the other side, but couldn't quite pin it down. But after hearing what I said, we saged the house and said some blessings. Still to this day, I've never experienced anything like that, nor do I want to. What creeped me out the most was that it was directed straight at me, as if it was wandering around and waiting until it was attracted and searched for an ideal life force. That was the only time that I've experienced anything paranormal, and I still cannot rationalize the experience to say that it was my mind playing tricks on me, or my cat just acting weird. I mean, I felt that cold air, and it was unnatural. My cat behaving the way that it was, that was unnormal too. So, say your prayers and eat your vegetables. So I'm just going to be blunt. I went to the hospital for just under a month, and while I was there, my nurses joked that I was on the haunted floor. They repeatedly got alarms and saw movement in my room while I was sleeping, allegedly. It got to the point that they had to turn off some of the alarms as they kept waking me up. Things started almost immediately, though, when I got home. I was getting out of the car, and my mother and I clearly heard someone shout my name when I stumbled. Then, when I was helped into bed, there were these sounds that we couldn't figure out where they were coming from. We checked everywhere too until, well, we just kind of gave up in the end. Then that night, my blanket and shirt were pulled so hard that I actually turned on my side, and I had a seizure just a few moments later. And finally, yesterday, I got out of bed alone only to collapse. My head felt fuzzy and I was incredibly exhausted and out of breath. There was no way, absolutely no way that I would be able to call for help, and it just happened so quickly. But then, my family literally came running into my room. They didn't hear me fall, but they were adamant that they heard someone scream their names from that part of the house. They first thought that it was one of them, but then quickly realized that it wasn't, asked me if I yelled, and I knew that it wasn't me. Mum said that someone had screamed her name though, and Dad and my sister, all their names back to back like they were being gutted. She was adamant that it sounded like someone was being murdered. So, I mean, it's not bad, but I'm just so lost. I'm a realist. I like science and explaining things away as best as I can. So, what the heck is going on? Can anyone please help, or at least give me some advice as to what to expect from this, because I just feel like I'm going crazy. So I've lived in this house for about 8 years now. My family bought it, and we're in a small city in Ontario, Canada. The house is just a typical house, I suppose, built in the 70s. The first day we moved in, I remember feeling a strange vibe in the house. Didn't really put much thought into it though, and when we toured the house before buying it, I never got any strange vibes at all, so I just chalked that up to me just feeling weird. Anyway, a few months in, we started experiencing strange, unexplainable things. Papers moving into other spots in the house when nobody is home. My grandmother died. Her death certificate moved to a completely different table one day while we were out. It's only two of us that live here, and it wasn't either of us that moved it. We'd both frequently seen shadows moving in the corners of our eyes too. If we were cooking in the kitchen, it would feel as if you were being watched, certainly enough to make you turn around and look as well. There were footsteps and just the usual haunted house things, I guess. Well, about 2 years in, my father got up in the night and went downstairs. His room is right across from mine, and I can see straight into the doorway from my bed. And I saw a white clouded figure walk into his room, and suddenly the door slammed shut, and that scared the heck out of me. I yelled at him for slamming the door, and a minute later, my dad walked up the stairs and asked me why I shut his door and why I was yelling at him. I explained to him that I just watched someone walk into his room and slam the door, but it wasn't me. I genuinely thought that it was him that walked into the room. Not to mention that my dad's door is on a weird angle, and it's not possible for the door to be blown shut like that. I mean, the door won't even stay halfway open without putting something in front of it. It just falls open and sits against the wall. You have to physically close the door for it to close. Skip forward a little bit, 4 years in, and I was sleeping one night and randomly woke up. I looked at the foot of the bed and saw a crystal clear image of a face staring at me. He was an old man and he was very blue-colored. I freaked out and went under the covers to try to fall back to sleep. About 6 years in, we find out from our neighbor that one of the past owners actually passed away in the house from a heart attack. He was an older man, so this is who I think we must have seen. We also randomly found out somehow that one of my cousins was friends with the last owner's children and spent a lot of time in this house. Before I even mentioned anything to her about the experiences that we'd had in the house, she asked if we knew that it was haunted. I didn't get any stories from her about what the old owners experienced in the house, but they also knew that it was haunted allegedly, so it wasn't just us. We've also seen some things that aren't explainable by the old man passing away in the house too. What I mean is that we've seen shadow figures and non-human figures. We kind of describe them as alien-like, in fact. Besides the creepy haunted vibes that we get and the strange shadow figures that we've seen, the old man ghost doesn't present to me as being harmful. He's just sort of there, I guess. He seems to be checking in on things, I suppose. He just sort of wanders around. There's a few rooms in particular, though, that always have a strange energy. One is the basement and the other is the sitting room that we have. The basement is just one large room. It's not a typical creepy basement by any means. It's definitely finished, but my cat is also extremely attracted to the basement for some reason. It's strange too because it's empty and there's really nothing down there that should draw her to it. There's been times where we've seen her batting at the air as if someone is playing with her too, but nothing is there. We've tried renting out the basement to tenants and it never works out. All of them leave after a few months. My sister once lived down there for a few months and had some very, very bizarre experiences that I won't share for now, but it's quite lengthy and feel free to let me know if you would like me to share those stories at some point. But anyone that goes down there, they always admit that there's a strange vibe to it. I want to make this basement into my bedroom, but to be quite honest, I'm sort of terrified to do so. All of the strange shadow figures and non-human entities that we've seen have always been in that basement. Usually while we're doing laundry down there we've seen them, or the past tenants have seen them down there too. But I just wonder what exactly that is. I'm comfortable having the old man ghost with us, but it's these non-human things that really just terrify me. I am a very logical scientist type, but I was raised as a Christian. Not super strict or anything, and we didn't go to church regularly, but it was ingrained that demons exist, so don't mess with them, don't play with Ouija, etc. Why take the risk? I had experiences in the house that I grew up in, footsteps and then laughter when I reacted. These were few and far between, mostly a general dark and uneasy feeling and feelings of being watched. Now when I'm there alone after not living there for years, watching dogs, I feel like a presence wants to keep me there, and it's much worse than when I lived there. It feels like since it knows that I'm not there often, it wants to make the most of its old prey being there, I suppose. I have a history of PTSD, unrelated to the house, so I imagine that that makes me the easiest target for a malicious entity. But I've been highly functional for about 5 years now, so it's not so bad. Now, yesterday, after being in the house alone for about an hour, after having a great day and a great week, I had a full-on mental breakdown. After calling someone and saying that I was scared of the presence, a noise led me to the living room, where the angel of a dog who was resting peacefully a minute earlier began doing a horrible growling and snarling sound, first into space and then towards me, that she has never done before. I grabbed my stuff and I split quickly. When I got back to my place, I saged myself and the house too. Today I went back wearing a cross, a malachite beaded bracelet, protects from or absorbs negative energies apparently, and brought my sage. I had my sister pray with me outside, then I went in and blessed the whole house. I felt pretty good about that, but more of a guess we'll have to wait and see if that even helped sort of thing. At home, I'm relaxing and had the malachite bracelet taken off, sitting next to me on the armchair of the couch. It was just sitting there, not being touched or anything, and the elastic suddenly snaps out of nowhere, and the beads literally fall everywhere. Obviously, it could be nothing. Like I said, I try to be as logical as I can, but with certain things, I try not to play. My one thought was, well, what if it did absorb some sort of malevolent energy, and its snapping released it here in my actual home? I don't feel the dark energy here, so I don't think it is, but again, I try not to play. An old Wiccan friend gave me a go-away evil spray sort of thing, so I sprayed them, am going to do sage over them, try to scoop them with something and soak in Florida water, I guess. I'm not touching them is what I'm getting at. That's a no for me. The thing is though is that I have to go back and am responsible for the dogs the next 2 days. I love these dogs. They've been really stressed too, not knowing where their owners are, so I'm definitely going to walk them and spend some time with them too. But I'll be honest and say that I'm concerned that with it being so close to Halloween, with the veil being its thinnest allegedly, each day, well, it could get worse. Does anyone have any advice for protecting myself while still being in that house for, well, short periods this weekend? I try to avoid going at night, but I need to for at least one of their meds. So if you have any advice, then thank you in advance. A few weekends ago, my friends and I set out for a camping trip in Lake Kagonza State Park, located in Staunton, WA. While finishing up some geocaching on a hiking trail near the outhouses, we encountered something, or I guess someone, strange. So, you can enter the trail after crossing the path of another trail that enters the forest. The trail that we were on circled a prairie that laid in the middle of the trail and was surrounded by forest. The sun was low in the sky. It had to have been roughly 6 p.m. The sun was just above the tree line as we started our hike. As we were at our last geocache of the night, the sun had just gone behind the tree line, and it was beginning to get dark, but we could still see without the assistance of flashlights. The forest, it went silent. No more sounds of bugs around us or birds that have been active all day. And, whatever it was, it approached us with a whistle. A bone-chilling whistle. Our entire group went silent and nobody said a word until we heard a second whistle. This second whistle was more broken up than the first, I guess, and in the slightly tipsy state that I was in, I thought that it had been a human whistle as it was not perfect. To that I responded with a pretty stern hello, hoping for an explanation as to why our group got whistled at twice. I thought you were dogs, a voice said as it rounded the trail towards us. As he passed our group, I noticed that I could not make out a face out on his person, but chalked it up to nerves and being distracted. As a group, we agreed that while it was a strange encounter, we shouldn't really panic, but took it as a sign to get off the trail at this stage. But this is where things get even more weird. You see, all 4 of us in the group kept our eyes peeled for anything as we made our way back to the car, when suddenly this creature, calling it a creature as it surely wasn't human, suddenly appeared on the edge of the trail closest to the woods. Staring blankly to the field in front of it, that would have been to our right, and in the flattest, driest tone it said, "Who's that guy?" Everyone in our group kept walking as I answered, "The same guy from earlier," as I assumed it was talking about my boyfriend who was behind the group. We had never been so silent on the walk back to the car though. Checking behind our shoulders and our surroundings constantly, we made it back to our campsite where we decided due to the time of the day that it would be best to wait to pack up until morning. While we were debriefing our experience, I told my friends how, in neither encounter, I just couldn't make out any faces. Being a female hiker, I make a point to gather some facial features of anyone that I cross on the trail, just as a bit of a just in case. But no one in our group could identify a face, and in our own ways we described how the face on this thing was not a human face. It seemed to almost have a blurred effect over what should have been a human face. All of us had seen the same thing, like you could tell where the eyes, nose and mouth should have been, but there was just none on this person or creature or whatever. Being that it whistled and was not identifiable, we are convinced that we may have encountered a skinwalker, but the weird thing is that they're just not that relevant in that area of Wisconsin. It was a long night at the campsite with the impending feeling of being watched. I'm spiritually inclined, and I took the necessary steps of protecting our campsite for a secured night's sleep. But I have had a strange encounter since then. I'm willing to explain those encounters at some point, but for now, I'd really like to get your thoughts on this. What did we see, and are skinwalkers known for having blurred faces like this? If you can help me out, then I would appreciate it. This is the second and the last of what I consider to be a paranormal encounter that I've experienced. This happened about 6 years ago, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So I was sleeping soundly when suddenly I felt a cold breath in my ear. It jolted me awake, but I didn't open my eyes out of fear of what I might have seen. I lay there motionless, pretending to be asleep. I could hear and feel every inhale and exhale. The breath was unnaturally cold, like the blast of air when you open a freezer, and it was right there brushing against my ear. For what felt like a few minutes, the icy breath lingered. Then it stopped. I felt a weight settle on my side, pressing down as if something was sitting on me. It was a little difficult to breathe with the pressure on me, but I was way too terrified to move. I stayed frozen, praying that whatever it was would just leave me alone. After about 15 minutes, the weight lifted off of me and I heard the breathing again, but it was above me now, on the ceiling. It hung there heavy and slow, moving to the center of the room, then it drifted to the corner above the door. Still too afraid to open my eyes, I tried to wait it out. It had to end sometime, right? In my mind, I was trying to think of a logical explanation for what could be happening, but none of it made any sense. I'm a skeptic of the paranormal, but whatever this was, it definitely did not feel human. I lay there paralyzed, listening to the breathing for what felt like forever. But roughly half an hour went by, and all I could do was focus on this heavy breathing coming from that corner of my room. I couldn't take it anymore, though. I mean, I had to do something, because just lying there hoping that it would end felt more terrifying than confronting it. If I stayed still, it might never leave, and that thought was worse than the fear itself. I remembered the flashlight on my nightstand. I had to grab it. I had to shine the light on the corner, expose whatever was there. So I rehearsed the plan over and over in my head. How far was the flashlight? How would I grab it? How fast could I turn it on? I went through every detail like it was life or death, because it felt like it was. If I messed up or if I fumbled, I genuinely thought that I could die. It sounds illogical, I know, but this whole situation was illogical, and I mean, when you go through something like this, it's hard to think clearly. Finally, though, I decided that it was time. So in one swift motion, I grabbed the flashlight off the nightstand, turned it on, and as I lifted it up, this must have taken less than half a second. If this was an Olympic sport, I would have won gold in that moment. That's how quickly I got to it. But as I shined the light into the corner of the room, I saw, well, nothing. There was nothing there, and the breathing had seemingly stopped. I sat there, trying to compose myself, trying to calm my racing heart as I shined the light around the room, searching for whatever had been tormenting me for the last hour at this stage. But there was no one, there was nothing, and I was alone. I got up and turned on the light, and then I sat there waiting for daylight to come, too scared to sleep now in case it came back. I don't have a logical explanation for what happened that night. How could I? How could I explain a chilling breath directly in my ear that I not only heard but felt? Crazy dream? No, this woke me up. I was having a wonderful sleep before this. So, how do I explain the weight of something sitting on top of me? I don't own any pets. I'm someone who likes to analyze things and think them through logically, but this is one thing that just doesn't have a logical explanation. I have since moved from that house, and thankfully I haven't experienced anything like that since then. I, a 20-year-old female, have been with my boyfriend, 22 and male, for over 5 years now. Throughout our relationship, he told me that he keeps experiencing sleep paralysis and that it became more and more frequent. He had maybe 1 or 2 the first 3 years, but last year they just kept getting worse. We are both students, and for the past 3 years he's been living in a rented apartment with a good friend of ours. Sometimes I spend the night there as well. And one time, last year, he told me that he experienced sleep paralysis again, and his experience went like this. He was aware and awake, but wasn't able to move or say anything, like his lips were glued together almost. He said that he tried to scream my name to wake me up so that I could help him, but just nothing ever came out of his mouth. He also mentioned that he kept seeing in front of one of the corners of the room a big black shadow that made him feel really nauseous. Thankfully, he eventually got out of it and he went back to bed. Now, the next day I was still there and he asked me to stay with him that night as well, in case something happened again, because he's starting to get a bit scared of it. I tried to stay awake in case something did happen, but I think I immediately fell asleep, to be honest. And this is how I was woken up in the middle of the night. So, I heard some sounds and immediately opened my eyes. And there was my boyfriend, laying on his side with his back to me, resting his head on one hand, and saying random stuff in a language that I have never ever heard before, looking at the exact same corner that he mentioned about when he had the sleep paralysis. The weirdest thing, though, is that it seemed like he was having an actual conversation. He would talk and then stop as if somebody was answering, and then he would talk again, and so on and so forth. I was like, what the heck is he doing? And called his name. He immediately stopped talking, and then the heaviest silence filled the room for what seemed like forever. Then he started hysterically laughing, the scariest laugh that I'd ever heard. Quite honestly, it didn't even seem to be his laugh. Next thing I know, he literally falls back asleep and starts snoring. I froze, not knowing what to do and also not wanting to wake him up again. I just stayed there waiting for the dawn while tearing up a bit. The next day, I told him about what had happened and he didn't remember any of it. He felt really sorry for what he put me through, although it wasn't his fault, obviously. We told his friend what had happened as well, and that made him share this experience from the same night. So, apparently, he had the worst nightmare where he felt like he was literally glued to the bed, forced to stare in the eyes of a dark figure in the corner of his room. He said that he literally tried to scream for help and asked if we heard anything. I certainly didn't. But then he woke up and the time was around 3 in the morning. I then asked if he heard my boyfriend hysterically laughing, and he said no. But I wouldn't be surprised if these things happened at the same time. To this day, this is my most frightening story that I've ever had, and they're still living there, so yeah, that's fun, I suppose. So firstly, I'll preface this with saying that I'm an open-minded person, but I don't instantly jump to the thinking that something is supernatural. I like to find a logical reason for something happening, and if anyone can bring any logic to this situation, then I will gladly take it. It's difficult to know where to start, so if I jump back and forward here a little bit, then I apologize. My home, it was inherited by my partner's parents after their death. His dad died 15 years ago, his mum 6 years ago. We lived in the house with his mum for a year before her passing, and in that time I was her full-time carer, and we became very close friends. When she passed away, we were distraught but knew that it was coming. She had stage 4 lymphoma and passed in the hospital. She was Irish Catholic, and after she passed, she was cremated and her ashes never came back to the house. I don't know if that's important, but I thought that I should mention it just in case. Now, my partner's dad didn't pass at home either, but his passing was much more sudden. He suffered a heart attack at work and died before the ambulance could get to him, unfortunately. Again, he was cremated, but his ashes did come home into the house, and both have since been buried in a family plot in Ireland. After he passed, I do believe that I saw his spirit in a mirror. When I entered the home one day, I saw him look in the mirror in the living room to check who was passing in the hall, like he has done many times before, when he was alive, that is. It wasn't long too after his passing, and I cannot be 100% about what I saw due to the grief, but this is not what I'm actually here to share today. The issue that I'm currently experiencing is a little more mischievous, I suppose. If I really think about it, this has been happening since we moved in, I suppose, but has really picked up momentum in the last few months. It started very simply. Something would go missing in the house, something that wouldn't normally go missing, such as an ornament in the living room, something that you would really have no reason to move. You would notice it was missing and look for it, get to the point of almost giving up, and then bam, it's right there almost right in front of you, and always somewhere that you have definitely checked before. More recently though, things that I need are going missing too. My keys, my debit card even, TV remotes, etc. The same pattern happens though. It's always you look for missing item, and just when you're about to throw in the towel, no matter where you've been already looking, it will appear in an incredibly obvious place where you have definitely looked. Now, I know what you're all thinking. You're just misplacing items, not looking hard enough, and then finding them later. That may be true, but it has happened to both my partner and myself, and us both collectively even. But it's the thing that happened yesterday, however, that is what is making me wonder what the heck is actually going on. So my partner is a bit of an idiot sometimes. He doesn't see an accident that's about to happen until it's too late. So he had his AirPods in his pocket. He pulled down his pants to use the toilet, did his business, and pulled his pants back up. And when he did that, his AirPods fell out of his pocket, straight into the loo that he had just pressed the flush for. He saw the AirPods disappear into the water, and so they were no more. He told me immediately about this. He was obviously disappointed because they're definitely not cheap, but he was more mad at himself for just being an idiot. We put the incident behind us and we moved on with our day though. Now, at the end of the night, we did the close down for our house, turned things off, got the dogs to go to bed, and we're about to turn in ourselves when he lets out a little bit of a scream. I run to him and the AirPods are sat on the top of the fireplace. They were definitely the same ones, as they have a little marking on the inside and have a teal silicone cover as well. The logical response is that my partner is playing tricks on me, but this has happened when he has not been in the house and could not have had anything to do with it. I also don't know if there's a possibility I'm just losing my mind or something. I keep remembering the stories my mother-in-law told me from her childhood. She grew up in Ireland in a rural location, and oh boy, she has some tales. Ghost stories, banshee screams. Her sister swears she saw a leprechaun one night, but it's a different story. I would be here all day recounting all of them, but she used to tell me about when she was a child and things would go missing in the house. She used to shout, "Okay, it's time to give it back now," or something to that effect, and within minutes the missing thing would be back in place. Is this the same thing now? Was something attached to my mother-in-law and now she is no longer here, it's with us? There is also sometimes a feeling in the house, I guess you could say. It feels heavy. I've felt physical pressure on my shoulders, in fact. This usually comes when I feel down or scared or any other big emotion. The heavy feeling isn't unpleasant, but it's not comforting either. It's not bad or good, it's just sort of there, I guess. I'll also add that we do have carbon monoxide detectors and they're checked frequently along with smoke and heat detectors, so they're all working. And so my question for all of you guys is, well, what's happening? Am I just going mad? Is something paranormal happening in my home? Any input would genuinely be very much appreciated. I've been on the fence for a very long time about whether to share this part of my story or not when I was a kid. Perhaps it's because now I hope to find some answers to what I had encountered, but whatever the case, here's what happened. So I used to live in the suburbs of Georgia in a pretty quiet neighborhood. I spent 16 years of my life at that house and experienced a lot of unusual activity. Actually, my entire family has. Guests and close friends of mine who have spent some time at my house, they've always left feeling unsettled. For the rough 16 years my family and I were living in that house, we never spoke a word on the unsettling events that we experienced until we moved out. It was 16 years later when we broke the silence to each other and made my childhood experience less of a what if and into a scary reality. So my mum told me that when she first bought the house, she had invited a lot of her church friends to come in and bless the home. One of the church members, upon entering the home, felt inclined to go upstairs into the master bedroom. Mind you, this is her first time visiting. My mum was confused, but allowed her to do so. When the friend walked into the master bedroom on the second floor, she apparently looked like she was seeing something that she shouldn't have, and abruptly sort of pulled my mum aside and told her to pray because the room was flooded with unwanted spirits. Then the blessing of the home proceeded more intensely within the group. Interestingly, my grandmother, who was visiting for the first time, had made a comment about this room as well, saying how it doesn't have a good atmosphere. She wasn't religious at all, by the way. My sister and I slept in that room every night as children, since we preferred sleeping with our grandparents rather than ourselves in our dedicated rooms. I remember having sleep paralysis every single day, and waking up at odd hours of the night staring into the dark cracks of the bathroom doors. I would always get chills, and then I would fall back to sleep. This was a daily occurrence, and when my sister and I got kicked out to the official move into your own shared room when I was 9, it was the same thing always. Sleep paralysis, wake up several times in the middle of the night, stare into the cracks of the doors, chills, and sleep. One night, though, stood out amongst many of the others that I could never forget. My bed at the time was situated where I was against the wall, and the foot of the bed meets the entrance of the door. Super bad feng shui, but I had woken up in the middle of the night again. I think my mum forgot to close the door behind her after tucking us into bed, so the door was wide open and my eyes were, for some reason, sort of hyperfixated straight into the master bedroom door, which I could see straight ahead on the right side. It was like I was expecting something to happen, and I see the black slit of a crack growing wider. The door was literally opening and I saw a white figure come out of the room. I saw her so clearly that I had never forgotten her sight. She was an old lady wearing a white Victorian dress, tight bun sitting at the nape of her neck, hands poised in front of her. She never turned in my direction, thank goodness, and literally made her way across my room and onto the staircase on my left, which was out of vision for me. I remember being frozen in unexplainable fear. I never shared this with anybody at the time, but I certainly never forgot it. And that was probably the major story of everything that happened there, but a frequent visitor that I'd see lurking in the dark was a young girl, also wearing a white dress. She would come into my dreams, stare at me from a corner and do her ghostly stuff. My sister and I realized that we had had the exact same dream of her as well at some point. As I got older, I got more numb to those activities, I suppose. Daily sleep paralysis was still a thing, and I started to get annoyed at them more than being scared. I learned later that a friend had a dream of that girl standing at the end of a master bedroom closet staring at him. It was when he moved into my neighborhood after his dream that he realized that the bedroom that he had seen was the one that I was in. A friend of mine later told me that when she slept over at my house, she had woken up to the girl staring at her, and she was able to describe the girl a little bit clearer than I could. A dirty white dress, long brown or black hair. She was young, maybe around 12 to 14. The list continues and more abnormal stuff occurred. My dog barking into the darkness in the middle of the night, hearing my name when nobody called me, footsteps when nobody was there. The sleep paralysis and all the paranormal stuff stopped when I moved out though, thankfully. And I always wondered if it had to do with the land that the home was situated on. I tried to see if my county had any records of what the land used to be used for before the house was built on it, but unfortunately, it was all to no avail. My name is Jules, and this story happened in 2022. At the time, I was a business school student, but my English skills left much to be desired. So to improve, I decided to take a gap year and move to Toronto, Canada, for intensive language courses. Since the costs were high, I found a shared apartment with some other students. It had 3 bedrooms and one was still empty, waiting for another student to move in. My roommate, Sandra, was a Swiss German, tall, almost 2 meters in fact, and 120 kilos, but also very friendly, and we quickly became friends. A few weeks later, Sandra told me that he was going on a week-long road trip through Canada's national parks. He was set to leave on a Saturday morning, while I had been informed that the new student would arrive that same day, probably around 3 p.m. Sandra left the apartment at 10 a.m., leaving me alone to wait for the new arrival. Hours went by, 3 p.m., then 4 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m., and still no one. I grabbed a bite to eat, watched a show on Netflix, and eventually decided to go to bed. Around midnight, I was suddenly awakened by knocks on the apartment door. I heard someone coming in. That must be the new student, I thought to myself, before hearing an unfamiliar voice explaining the apartment's layout. I stayed in my room, too tired to go out, and eventually I fell back asleep. But a few minutes later, there were knocks on my door. Once, then a second time, and then 10 minutes later. Thinking that there might be a problem, I eventually got up, and I found myself face to face with a young Japanese woman, around 25 years old. I quickly explained a few details about the apartment. We exchanged Instagram handles, and then each of us went back to our rooms for the night. In the following days, she often asked me to accompany her when taking the bus or the subway. I gladly helped out, showing her the stops and the good spots for getting around, and then returned to my routine between classes and gym sessions. But gradually, something strange started to happen. You see, every evening when I came back, she would always be talking to me, either by message or when we bumped into each other in the apartment. The situation became increasingly heavy too. Then one evening, while lying on my bed, I noticed a figure on the shared balcony right in front of my bedroom window. She was leaning against the railing, staring at me. Her gaze was piercing and unsettling. When she realized that I had seen her, she quickly turned away and went back into her room. I sort of shivered at that, but I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. Later, around midnight, as I turned off the lights to fall asleep, I glanced out the window again, and she was still there, standing, watching me. Our eyes met again, and she vanished instantly. The scene repeated itself the following nights. Every evening, I would watch her watching me from the balcony, always at the same time, always with that fixed gaze. And every time she disappeared as soon as she realized that I had noticed her, but the night before my departure, the situation took an even more disturbing turn. One morning I had to get up particularly early for an appointment. It was about 5:30 in the morning when I left my room, and the entire apartment was shrouded in darkness, except for the faint light filtering from underneath the bathroom door where I was brushing my teeth, when suddenly I heard a noise behind me. The young woman emerged from her room, silent, her footsteps softly echoing on the wooden floor. She knew that I was there, and she saw the light under the door. I froze, a chill running down my spine all of a sudden. There I was, in my underwear, toothbrush in hand, wondering what she wanted. But instead of turning back, she opened the bathroom door and came in, sitting on the closed toilet facing me. She didn't say a word either. She just sat there, motionless, her gaze locked into mine with a blank, almost empty expression. The scene dragged on for long, icy seconds where the silence grew oppressive. Then, slowly, I gathered myself and I left the room, closing the door behind me. I returned to my room very slowly, trying to show that I didn't understand what was going on, but her English was too poor for us to have a proper conversation. In the days that followed, I became increasingly cautious, watching her every move, but she continued to observe me every evening from the balcony like a disturbing shadow in the night. Until, on the night before my departure, things took an even more terrifying turn. So I was having dinner in my room when I saw her again through the window, staring intensely inside. I looked away, hoping that she would just leave like she always did. Then, later that night at around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly from a nightmare. I turned my head and there she was, still on the balcony, her eyes wide open now, fixed on me. For some reason, my blood ran cold. This time, she didn't look away too. She remained motionless like a statue. Then, abruptly, she turned and started running inside the apartment. My heart pounded. I rushed to lock my door and I buried myself under the covers, hoping that it was all just a bad dream. But a few seconds later, I heard footsteps behind my door. Then an attempt to open it, gently at first, then more forcefully. She was pressing on the handle, trying to get into my room. Panicked, I remained still, holding my breath, and then everything went silent again. I heard nothing more. She must have gone back to her room, I guess, but that night it felt endless. I returned to France the next day, and she was no longer in the apartment for whatever reason. I don't know what was up with her. I guess maybe she was fascinated to see a European. That's my best guess, but something tells me that there was more to it. Her eyes were just wild, and she seemed, well, sinister to say the least. Anyway, I also thought that she might have been looking for an adventure with me or trying to steal my passport or something. Again, I'm not entirely sure, but do take care, everyone. This is a story that I'll never forget, and I hope it helps others to stay alert and aware when traveling, because you just never know who you might come into contact with. So I've had a handful of paranormal experiences in my life that it could all be chalked up to anxiety, an overactive imagination, or maybe even being high once or twice. Well, all except for one. It was pretty minor, but I still haven't been able to explain it, no matter how I rack my brain over it. So back when I was a kid and still a Christian, specifically of the evangelical flavor, I'd often theorize about things that I'd read in the Bible, as if it were any of the other stories I'd like to do that with. My church mates and pastors were not fans of my hot Christian lore takes, if you were wondering, but one notion that I'd taken to was the idea that demons, they scare people because that's what gives them power to escalate and do everything else. So, the few times I found myself in a situation that I decided might be paranormal, my approach was to firmly and pointedly ignore it. My childhood best friend lived in a house that she had strange experiences in, as did her dad. According to her, she often heard footsteps, felt like she was being watched, things went missing and showed up in odd places, random chills in the air, that sort of thing. Pretty stereotypical ghost tropes. I did hear the footsteps once, but that could have been the house sounds. I definitely experienced the random chills though, and sudden distinct feeling of being watched and loomed over, but that could have been anxiety as well. And you know how fear can be sort of contagious around other people, especially if you're already predisposed to believe in ghosts and demons? Well, I definitely had nightmares more often in that house, but that could have been subconscious fears, right? I heard children laughing once, but I do have an overactive imagination and have had audible hallucinations more than a handful of times, I think. But the one thing that I could never explain was this. So I'd been coming to this house since about age 8, and I was now 18. I was staying with my friend and her dad for a few months. I wanted to try living somewhere that wasn't with my parents for a while, and I was alone in the house at the time. I was on my computer and I heard some sort of an odd banging sound. Immediately after, I got that being loomed over feeling, that sort of being stared at feeling, and oddly enough, I got the distinct notion that something was very angry. I responded by cranking my computer volume all the way up on my headphones, of course, and putting on an ASDF movie compilation. As somebody who did a lot of maladaptive daydreaming and had already gotten used to ignoring scary things that I didn't like, I was able to pretty quickly remove my mind from the situation. Except, that angry feeling just never seemed to go away this time. I didn't dwell on it, but it was definitely still present, and as I refused to acknowledge it, I distinctly remember feeling that anger sort of swell. And then, the weirdest thing happened. Completely alone in the house, a penny was pitched at the back of my head hard enough that it left a tiny goose egg afterwards. You'd think that would freak me out, and I did startle, of course, but immediately afterward I just actually burst out laughing. I think that I said something along the lines of paranormal activity really hyped you guys up, didn't it? And then promptly returned to watching stickmen vomit rainbows. The feeling dissipated after that. I remember noticing sometime later too that I never got any weird feelings in the house anymore unless I was around my friend. I'm still dubious about the paranormal, and to be quite honest, I'd be outright dismissive if it weren't for that damn penny. To this day, it still bothers me deeply, and I genuinely just have no way to explain it. So this one time, I was at Walmart with my dad. But this wasn't a large Walmart. It was one of those neighborhood grocery store or smaller versions. I believe I was about 8 or 9, and I'm now in my 30s. We were grocery shopping like any other night. On this particular night, my dad and I were walking towards the exit after checking out when suddenly, my dad realized that he forgot the toilet paper. He hadn't exited the store quite yet, and we're right outside of the bathroom or drinking fountains, which, from what I have seen, are typically placed in the same general location in most Walmarts. And my dad said, "Wait right here by the basket, buddy, and I'll be right back." This wasn't unusual, since I was allowed to go and grab things that I needed on my own, like shampoo and whatnot, and I knew to be on my guard at all times. Now, it couldn't have been more than 2 minutes that I found myself being approached by a man. To be honest, I really can't remember much else other than the fact that he was a man and was a lot older than me. I really can't remember his face or height or what he was wearing. The rest is pretty much a total blur, but this man came up to me and said, "Hey." I remember looking up at the man as I gripped the handles of the basket. "I have puppies in my car," he said. "I've also got candy." You know, the whole spiel all of our parents warned us about. The man began to wave me toward him and reached his hand out, as though he would place it on my shoulder. I held onto the basket handle as tight as I could, and in that exact moment, I heard my dad shout, "Hey!" It was almost an actual roar as well. The man, he reacted instantly and moved so quickly through the exit doors that it almost looked like he evaporated. My dad, he grabbed me and was likely putting together the pieces faster than my little brain was processing the whole thing. Since nothing actually came of this though, I can't say for sure what the man's motives were. Regardless though, my dad will always be my hero, and I'll never forget the lesson I learned that day about the importance of being aware of your surroundings at all times, no matter how often you have been somewhere or how comfortable you may feel there. I live a little ways out in the woods, on a small dirt road with a few neighbors who also live on our small street. It's a quiet place, I guess. We all know each other and get along pretty decently. Given that we host little bonfires sometimes and invite the neighbors around to grill and have a few drinks, we often discuss things that we've seen lately in our little patch of the forest. A group of lovely deer, a mischievous raccoon, or the odd wandering bear often are topics of conversation. However, inevitably, we often end up on the subject of a mutual experience most of us have had with unexplainable phenomena happening around our homes. It's really no secret that my woods tend to make people a bit uneasy. It's dark, it's quiet, and that tends to make people a bit tense. I'm definitely no different too. I mean, I don't go outside after dark if I don't have to, and I get spooked at times when an animal makes a ruckus. There are some things though that I just cannot attribute to animals. To start though, I have to go all the way back to when I was 13, when I first moved onto this property. I often felt watched at night, I guess you could say. I was terrified to sleep without the lights on. I tried my best to ignore it, but I was honestly terrified to be outside at night or to be here alone. For my 14th birthday, I decided to face my fears so I could pitch a tent outside and camp in the yard with a few good friends. One of them left in the middle of the night because they were so anxious. Another left early in the morning after barely sleeping all night. The last friend stayed a couple of extra days, but was creeped out the entire time that we were there. She claimed to have briefly seen the apparition of a pale woman with dark hair as well, standing in our yard, and allegedly felt something touch her at night. She was truly terrified, and I could tell that she was being honest. Like when I tapped her shoulder once, she startled very easily and almost hit me out of fright. This was very abnormal for her, and I spoke to my uncle who lives next door about the woman that she saw, and to my surprise, he claimed to have also seen the same apparition multiple times. He wasn't even surprised when I brought it up. I moved out not long after this, but recently I've moved back here. Since returning as an adult, I've heard several stories from my family and neighbors about weird phenomena like this too. My uncle has seen the lady, but also shadow figures, and heard some unnatural noises coming from the woods at night. As a man who has lived out here for over 40 years at this point, he's very familiar with the unusual sounds of animals and nature, and he didn't think that these sounds were natural. His wife has also seen shadow figures and weird masses of black energy. She claimed to have been pushed over by an unseen force after witnessing one of these black masses of energy, and she has never gone outside at night since then. My grandmother claimed to have been chased by a shadow entity several years ago on this property while walking back from my uncle's place. It stopped at her front door and watched her while she cried and called my aunt and uncle for help. Understandably too, and they told her to light some sage after this. A couple of neighbors have claimed to have seen similar shadow figures, as well as the apparition of the lady on occasion. I still feel watched, and I regularly cleanse my house to keep, well, whatever this is, out there as far from my home as possible. A good friend of mine, when I first moved back in, called me with concerns over a dream that she had too. This was before she had even set foot on my property. She described my property perfectly, and described seeing the same pale woman that multiple people now have seen. I was understandably shaken by this, considering that she'd not once been to my home at the time, and I hadn't really discussed the weird happenings with her at all. She did spend the night one time, but after that just refused to do it again. My street is honestly super creepy, and I've come to accept that something more is here. With all of the shared experiences, I just cannot deny that something is out there now. It's been here a long time from what I can tell, and seems to make itself known to anyone who spends enough time here. For context, this teacher was in his late 50s to 60s and was highly respected in the small Central Californian community that I lived in at the time. He was the AP economics teacher at my high school. This took place about 15 years ago when I was a senior. I remember several weird experiences with this teacher, like one day in class, and I don't know how it was brought up, but Mr. Smith decided that he was going to give our class a mental exercise. I didn't think anything of it, but then again I was a pretty innocent and naive teenager at the time. The class went along with it and didn't see an issue with this. But I remember him saying that he was also a psychology professor at the local university. Anyway, he told the class to close our eyes and meditate for a few minutes and begin thinking about immersing ourselves in a body of water. He said that it was okay if we envisioned a river, a creek, an ocean, or whatever, but he stressed that it had to be water that we were imagining ourselves in. So I began letting the thoughts come, and I imagined myself next to a creek bed, throwing rocks into the water. You can stop now, open your eyes. The exercise was done. He told us to remember our visions, and he said that he was going to ask each of us what we imagined. Mind you, the class was split between girls and boys, so each of us go around, one by one, and tells the class out loud what we thought about. I remember a boy in my class said that he imagined himself in a rushing waterfall, and there were girls that mentioned that they were swimming in a lake, fishing at the pond, and so on. My turn came, and I told Mr. Smith in our class that I imagined myself next to a small creek. I specifically remember that he has this sort of weird grin the entire time each of us were telling him what was in our minds during this exercise. Mr. Smith finally told us why he had the class do this exercise. He said the exercise was to measure our sexuality and our awakening, I guess you could say. He said that the people who envisioned themselves in large bodies of water had a high drive, while the students who were in calmer and smaller environments of water hadn't really tapped into their sexuality yet. The boy who had the vision of being in a waterfall made a joke and the whole class laughed. I just remember thinking, though, that it was really weird. I looked around at the class and it didn't seem like anyone was uncomfortable, I guess. If they were, they didn't voice it or express it. Mr. Creepy, though, also did this thing where he would pick on a student and ask them a very specific question from our economics textbook. If the student didn't give him an answer that he liked, he would stare them down for literally what felt like a minute without saying anything. You could feel the tension in the class too in these moments, and usually the student with the wrong answer would sink down into their seat with humiliation. Anyway, a few months later, I approached Mr. Smith after class and asked him what I could do for extra credit. I only took away a few things from this conversation. I remember him telling me, "You're incredibly smart. I don't think you need extra credit." Okay, but still, I wanted extra credit. So then he says, "I love your shirt. Where did you get it?" I was wearing a shirt with a unicorn, a yellow yield sign, so I told him that I bought it at a thrift store called Red Light, located in Seattle, where I'm from. He had this stupid grin on his face and asked, "What is it?" And then he said, "You know that Red Light is a explicit site, right? Did you know anything about that?" Upon hearing that, I immediately left. I later looked up the website, I admit, and sure enough, there was all the explicit material that he was referring to. Later on in the semester, Mr. Smith stopped coming to class and we had a substitute for the remainder of the year after that. I remember other students whispering in class where Mr. Smith had gone, and some students were also saying that they had overheard that he got in trouble and was also now being investigated. When I was a Mormon, ages 18 to 28, I went on a mission for the Mormon church like all Mormon men are supposed to do. It was a rite of passage, basically, and it was a full-time sales force for the church. You've probably seen them around, white shirts and ties, usually riding bikes, knocking on doors, trying to get people to believe in angels, giving gold tablets to a farm boy named Joseph Smith. Not much luck if you ask me. It was like trying to sell yellow snow to Eskimos. They just weren't buying it. However, I did have some supernatural experiences, I guess you could say, on my mission. Had such experiences all my life, in fact, and I would like to share some of them with you guys. So, on my mission, I had a dream of a woman and baby being put into a coffin with lots of people crying. I woke up very depressed and sort of sad, and the next day we tracked it into an active member family. who recently lost the wife and baby of the son at Ocean Shores, Washington. She was holding the baby in the surf and a wave came up with a log on it, hit her in the head. She died and unfortunately the baby didn't make it before they could rescue him. They were both buried in the same casket and they were the people in the dream. Another time on a mission, we rented a room in a house from a crazy woman who ran a boarding house for men, and a voice called my first name from the closet at night. Mind you, nobody knew my first name, not even my companion. On Mormon missions, missionaries go by Elder so-and-so, and they don't use their first names. But the voice, it kept calling my first name. But how did it know that? I woke up one morning with 3 deep scratches from my groin to my belly, like teen tattoos. They didn't bleed, but man did they burn. The woman had no cat, by the way. A rat could have done it, I suppose, but it would have wakened me up, I think. I never did tell the woman about this, but the next day she said, "Oh, by the way, this house is haunted." Well, we left the very next day. On another occasion in the city of Pacifica, south of San Francisco, we were tracked into an active smoking Mormon. We chatted inside his home near the front door. All he could talk about was how much of a promiscuous woman his daughter was. He heard a knock on the door though, and he opened it, and there stood a massive American Indian about 6'7" or so. The smoking Mormon introduced the Indian as his neighbor Joseph. And when I looked at this Indian, a voice said in my left ear, "He's a murderer." I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. They chatted for a minute and Joseph left. After he left, the smoking Mormon said, "Yep, that was my neighbor Joseph. He's a really swell guy. He's going through a tough time right now. He had to sell his home for bail money. He's been falsely accused of murder." We left pretty soon after that. Also in Pacifica, I lived in a small room with 3 other missionaries. We had bunk beds. One night, when it was raining hard, we stayed in and told some stories. The older elders, they had one story after another of their many sexual conquests in high school. I turned the discussion to ghosts at one point, and as I was talking, a white figure of a young man, about 16 I would say, appeared in the doorway to the tiny kitchen. Just his head and shoulders, and he looked as if he was going to speak, but then got the facial expression of, "What's the use, they can't hear me" sort of thing. The young man faded away and I said, "I see a ghost over by the kitchen." The other elders said, "Shut up, you're just trying to scare us." But my companion said, "No, I saw something too, like a cloud." I could see the young man's face clearly, and the impression I got was that he was a surfer who died in the ocean, perhaps. We lived 100 feet from the ocean, and surfing was illegal there, but many did it anyway, because in the winter the waves were absolutely huge, and there were many great white sharks there as well because of a seal island not far away. Now, the last event on my mission was that I hit a chunk on broken concrete with my 10-speed and went over the handlebars and fell into oncoming traffic. I then felt lifted up by my armpits and pulled back 3 feet. I looked around, but nobody was there, just cars all around me. My companion was already a half a block away, pumping his bike pedals furiously, taking no notice of me. No pedestrians were around anywhere to be seen, and a car ran over my front tire of my bike just as I was being pulled back. Had I not been pulled back 3 feet, the car would have run over my upper body at least, and perhaps my head. That wasn't the first time, nor the last, that unseen hands saved me from death or great bodily injury. But I left my mission disillusioned with missions, mission presidents, and even some missionaries. I thought that it would be an inspiring adventure, but it turned out to be a very boring sort of door-to-door sales job, like trying to sell yellow snow to Eskimos, as I said before. The other missionaries were looking for numbers, I guess, to impress their family and wards, home congregations, and the mission president, the man in charge of the missionaries. I was looking for seekers of truth, though, and was shocked to only find one, a good man who just could not join the church because, well, he smoked. All of our other investigators, people we tried to convert to the church, They were not seekers of the truth, but listened to us because they wanted to marry a good-looking Mormon woman, or because they thought the church could help them out financially, etc. It was all very disappointing, disillusioning, but I did have those paranormal experiences. I eventually resigned from the Mormon church and became the follower of a miracle-working prophet from Lebanon at one point. Those are all days gone by now, but I'll never forget my experiences from when I was a Mormon. I have never truly believed in the supernatural. I thought that it could be possible, I guess, so I stayed the heck away from Ouija boards and the like. But my opinion changed after I had my own personal ghost encounter. I was renting a room in Thailand, and I had been there for a month with no strange occurrences. However, on my second to last day, I woke up and something was off. I felt a distinct presence, I guess. I knew someone was in my room and that he was male. I sat up in bed and I saw a man standing in front of my door. The door was closed behind him. At first I thought it was my next door neighbor had come into my room, but as I tried looking at him, he had no distinctive features. I'm really not sure how to explain it, but it was like I could only see him with my peripheral vision. Any detail I tried to focus on was fuzzy and unclear. That's when the panic began to set in because I realized I was not seeing a live human. I kept thinking that it would go away if I just kept blinking. So I'm sitting in bed blinking over and over like a maniac, and this thing is just not disappearing. After about 10 seconds of this, I reached for my glass to try and get a clearer look. When I looked back to the door, there was nothing. To be clear, I was scared, but I never felt threatened per se. It was just there sort of thing. I was so convinced I must have had a full-blown hallucination, I just went about my normal day. My host called me later in the day to invite me to the market with her visiting family, and I casually said, for sure. Also, I think I saw a ghost this morning. She responds, did you actually? Come downstairs right now. So I went to her place downstairs, and she was hanging out with her family. This is when she drops the bomb that her house is haunted. She said that she doesn't advertise it, because obviously it would hurt her business, but guests have occasionally seen him over the years. Apparently, both her mother and sister also saw signs of the ghost in the hours before me, a toy car moving by itself, and the sound of a boy laughing in the house. She shared that he is the ghost of a young boy, and that he is allegedly the protector of the house. She showed me his shrine, and it was covered in things that a little boy would enjoy. She said that they were discussing how I was going to be leaving the night before, and she thinks he visited to say goodbye perhaps. She also said that I should buy a small treat to leave at this shrine to say thank you, and I did all that, and flew home the next day. Here's the thing though, I didn't see a boy, I saw a man. I didn't feel a child's presence, I felt the presence of a man. So, was the ghost boy and the sightings by her family just a strange coincidence and I just straight up hallucinated? It felt so real though. I've never had any sort of hallucinations prior or since that encounter. I've never had sleep paralysis before, and that morning I wasn't paralyzed or anything. This whole experience has shifted my worldview, and sometimes I feel like I'm just going crazy. I'm looking for an explanation, I guess, supernatural or otherwise, for what I witnessed. I've lived here for 10 years now, and there have been things that have happened that have driven me to find answers about it, and even at times beg my husband to leave. I often hear disembodied voices, so compellingly I think someone is in my house, so I go meet them, only to find that there's nobody there. For a while, my front door would open and close by itself. It's a heavy door, made of steel and glass, and there's no way that it could swing open by itself and slam shut. The knob has become a little stuck over the years, and we often have to try multiple ways of opening it now. I even started dowsing to try and find if there were any higher energy fields in my house. I've read so many books to try to explain the sense of anxiety that I get here as well, from fairies to telluric currents. My pendant showed me a path that goes from a hill outside my house, through my house, out the other side and down the creek. After asking it to show me the door that it comes through, I came into my living room from working one day to see the door had been put up in search on my TV, which honestly, I have no idea how that happened. Just yesterday, I noticed a handful of little white pills on my coffee table. I have no idea what they are and how they got there, and neither does my husband. There were probably 10 or so just sort of lined up in a row with no suggestion of how they got there or who put them there in the first place. I've spent 10 years now trying to figure this out, and I haven't even gotten into everything that I've experienced here. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions, I would genuinely love to hear them because, like I said, this whole thing has me absolutely freaked out and I just want to get out of here. A while ago, I was a young and foolish hardcore atheist type who would basically just give it to anyone talking about ghosts or aliens or anything out there, I guess you could say. My worldview was extremely narrow and didn't have much interest in anything outside of going to the pub with my mates. Now, I want to share with you guys the experience which forced me to completely 180 from that old, annoying character into someone who fully believes, no, not believes, but knows the existence of the spiritual world. I was living with my ex-girlfriend, and on her street was a big house on the corner. The property was surrounded by a high fence, but there was a little gate in the middle where you could sort of get a glimpse of the well-kept garden that was there. An old woman who lived alone there and could often be seen pottering around in her garden, who most of her time outdoors would be spent behind the little gate between the fences. We'd see her there all the time, chatting with neighbors or just having a nosy up the street. I never really spoke to her myself, but I did see her there a lot. Now one night at around 10:30, I was pulling up on the street outside of my girlfriend's house after going to see my mate. It was dark, I had literally nothing on my mind, and really wasn't thinking about anything. I parked the car and I proceeded to get out of the door. The house on the corner with the gate was just in front of my parking spot. As I close my car door and I start to lock it, I noticed a bright light coming from that gate. And that was when I look and see a full apparition of this old woman. It was her, but it was like a foggy, translucent figure of her, giving off a pretty big amount of white light. The fence was even illuminated by the light that she was radiating. She turned and looked at me, and as soon as we faced each other, she shifted behind the fence. It wasn't like somebody stepping aside though, it was like she sort of drifted sideways, as if floating. Being who I was, I instantly tried to dismiss it, convincing myself that I just imagined it. I went into my girlfriend's house and said, "You're going to think that I'm crazy, but I'm sure I just saw a ghost or something at that old woman's house." My girlfriend replied, "You do know she died 2 days ago, don't you?" At that, I froze. Her words were horrifying because they confirmed what I saw. I started freaking out. Kind of funny now that I look back on it all. I remember my eyes were just sort of streaming and I was just sort of in shock, I guess. I kept replaying what I just saw over and over in my mind. It just hit me like a truck. I needed that experience badly, and it changed me and led me on a whole journey of, well, if ghosts are real, what else is there? And I've since discovered a ton about this strange realm that I would have never learned if not for that experience. I really don't care if anyone believes me or not. I wouldn't have believed me either if not for seeing it with my own eyes. We can entertain ghost stories or even choose to believe them, I suppose, but You can't really know them until you've definitely seen it for yourself. I personally have never really shared this, though my wife and girlfriend loves to share this story with anybody who will listen. Years ago, when we first met, my wife and I shared a love of photography and exploration. We called it ghost hunting at the time, but it was more akin to visiting abandoned locations and just taking photographs. I used a 35mm camera with Ilford HP5 Plus film, and she used a Canon Rebel digital camera. We would often scout locations online, with plans to visit them and get some pics for our library. This time it was an old abandoned fuel refinery or storage depot, just off of a beach overlooking Lake Ontario. It would be tricky getting into the old refinery itself from the front, and so I used Google Maps to see if there was any other way that we could get in. It looked like a wall was blocking most of our way in, except for a small section just off of the beach that had only had a chain link fence there. The beach itself looked extremely disheveled, like it had seen little use, so we hoped that this would give us the privacy that we needed to sneak in. I mean, sneaking into an abandoned industrial structure isn't exactly legal, but we didn't want anyone calling the cops on us or whatever. So we packed our gear and we headed out on our excursion. We had a hard time finding the entrance to the beach parking lot, but we found that it was blocked only by a loose chain that lay on the ground, half buried in the dirt as if someone had removed it long ago and just sort of left it there. As we pulled into the parking area, there were no cars except for ours, which we noticed immediately. As we pull in and I park, my wife points out and says, "There's people here." I look up and see several dozen people, all along the shoreline, and all staring out at the water at literally nothing. No ships, no planes, no boats of any kind. They're all just sort of staring blankly. There was nothing particularly interesting about these people. They were all different age groups from young adults to elderly, though there were no children and all were dressed as you'd expect people to dress. What I mean is that it was a warm sunny day, and though some were in shorts, I found it odd that others were in long pants with jackets. It was far too warm for a jacket. What really struck me though was the confusion of how they got there. I mean, there were no cars, no bikes, nothing, and no place to park up on the street for, I would say, at least a few kilometers. No houses nearby either, so no chance of locals. No houses nearby either, so perhaps they were locals? Maybe, but from where? Anyway, they're pretty much ignoring us as we sit in the car, contemplating whether to call the whole thing off, partially because of our need for privacy and partly because of how weird it was feeling. After a few minutes of deliberation, we decided to continue on with the plan though, thinking that whatever they were doing, they're not really interested in us it seems. So we got out of the car, grabbing our cameras, and no sooner do we close and lock our doors when every one of their heads turns to look at us. I mean, every one of them, and there's a couple of dozen of them, still facing the water with their body, but their heads turned to look at our direction. We sort of froze for a second, looked at each other, just completely weirded out. It felt like a long time, but was probably only a minute or so when they all just turned back to face the water, ignoring us again, but all at the exact same time. At this point, we got together and in whispers were discussing what to do. All the while we were watching these people who were now completely ignoring us. Finally though, after some back and forth, we decided to press on in the end. Honestly, we'd been to some far sketchier places in the past, though this was definitely a new one for sure. We walked along the beach to the section of the wall where the fence was, and found a gap to enter it. This is when I noticed that they were looking at us again, every single one of them. We paused at this, and hesitated to enter. After a few minutes, they again turned away, so, trying to be sneaky, we ducked behind the wall to the fence, and from where we were, I couldn't see all of them, but the half dozen or so that I did see, they had again turned their heads toward us. not moving their bodies, just their heads. It just seemed that every time that we moved, that's when they would look at us as well. We were sort of committed at this point though, and so we decided to get in, take our pics, and then quickly get out. Now, the time that we spent in the refinery, it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. We planned for an hour or more originally, but the strangest being what it was, we knew that this one had to be a short one. As we climbed back through the gap in the fence, the first thing that caught me was that there was nobody in sight. As we climbed back through the gap in the fence, the first thing that caught me was that suddenly there was nobody in sight. I stopped my wife and told her this as we hesitated before passing the wall. We looked out slowly, trying not to call attention to ourselves. As we passed the wall, the entire beach was in view, and there was not a single person there. Nobody. Even stranger though was that it looked like nobody had been there at all, at least for a long time. Now, I certainly didn't make any close inspection of the area, but the sand looked undisturbed. There were some footprints, but not enough for several dozen people, and they didn't look new by any means. You know how a beach's sand can look sort of dry on the surface, but if you kick it, darker wet sand underneath shows? Well, there was none of that. Just a few small dunes of dry, blown sand around. It was really, really eerie. The only noise were the distant cars on the road, and after this, we just hurried back to our car. Not running really, but definitely not taking the time to enjoy a day at the beach. Not that there was much to enjoy there anyway. But we will never forget that place and how truly freaky all of that was. This story is of some of the first memories that I have. It takes place in a house in Ostel. There's no real order to these, as they happened over 30 years ago now. Since these, though, I have never had another experience again. To be honest, I sort of wish I had, though. So I had a toy record player that was plastic. It played thick plastic records, and one day while I was playing with it, sound just started coming out of the speaker. I don't remember what it was. It didn't last long. I tried to get it to do it again, but nothing. That night, I would hear dishes clank together when everybody was asleep. But the way my bed was in my room, I could see down the hallway, and one night, while laying there, I saw a skeleton peek around the corner and wave at me. Another night, I was sleeping on my stomach, and I felt a hand or a claw down my back. Not hard enough to be painful, but definitely enough to wake me up. The next morning, I asked my parents if they had been in my room or not, and both of them said no. These things didn't really scare me, I guess, as I wasn't really old enough to understand what was going on. But the next things, they definitely did scare me and are 100% as I remember them. So I awoke one night to my bed moving, shifting around, levitating even. I heard two male voices talking. I quietly said, "Hey," and one of the voices said, "Shut up, kid." I promptly did just that, and I hid under my covers until I woke up the next day, which is the theme for the next two as well. My mother was sitting on the side of my bed. She was wearing a towel around her body and one around her head while she had just gotten out of the shower. We were praying at the time, and she laid me down to go to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep, and it was at this time that she just sort of faded away. I screamed for her as loud as I could. She came running out of my sister's room into my doorway. Behind her, soldiers in full uniform came running out as well. I hid, and my screaming seemed to have not been heard by anyone, like I was in a bubble at the time. The only one that heard anything was my mother, who came running. The final story is when I went to my parents' room to climb in between them one night. They were both very much asleep, and after laying there for a few minutes, I hear a voice. "Hey kid." I look at the foot of the bed, and there's this ventriloquist doll, Charlie McCarthy, just sort of, I don't know, like standing there, or floating maybe. Mind you, I didn't know that this was him until much later, but he asked me what my name was, what my parents' names were, and after that I got too scared and I hid under the covers. I once wrote the people who lived in this house a while back, asking if they had anything happen to them, and unfortunately I never got a response. But those are my experiences, and to this day I swear by them that they are true. I've decided to share my story because it's something that has stuck with me, and I've never heard a similar experience from anyone else. For context too, I grew up in a very haunted farmhouse. My family saw and heard things as well. So, I was around 10 years old and I was upstairs playing with a little bouncy ball at some stage. I bounced it and it went behind a big dresser, so I went over to grab it naturally. Now, there was a smaller dresser next to it that was full of my dad's old comic books, and when I leaned over to grab the ball, a slender white hand came out of the drawer and grabbed onto my wrist. Obviously, I freaked out and tried pulling away, then the hand gripped tighter, so I started screaming. My brother came running up the stairs, and as soon as he reached the top, the hand let go and disappeared back into the drawer. He didn't see it, unfortunately, but he believed me because of, well, just how shaken up I was. I'm curious, though, if anyone else has experienced anything like this. It's not the only thing that happened to me there, but it was definitely one of the scariest. I still think about it a lot. This happened back in 2017, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was in my bedroom laying on my bed. The way the bed is positioned, you can sort of see out into the living room, seeing the TV. My door was open at the time as well, and it was about 1 a.m. Now, the living room television turned on by itself to its loudest volume, and it startled me a lot. I didn't think too much of it because I assumed it was my stepdad, because he enjoys playing pranks on me all the time. So I waited it out until he would come out laughing or do some sort of a jump scare, but in the end he never did. In fact, he came out of his bedroom asking why the TV was on and why it was so loud. Quite honestly, I thought that he was joking, but he was really serious and had a sort of groggy look on his face. So he turns it off and we go back to sleep eventually. The next morning, I asked my dad why the TV went off like that, and he claims that it was the connection to the satellite, and it was nothing to worry about. His explanation, though, it never really sat right with me at all, because, first off, that just doesn't make any sense. We don't have a satellite. We had Xfinity at the time. And that television, it didn't have cable, just my dad's room. I asked him again, and this time he tells me in a soft and serious tone, "Don't tell your stepdad that it was a ghost or he's going to freak out and be terrified. Just say that it was the satellite and move on." I did just that as to not cause a commotion, but man, I was absolutely terrified now. Mostly because a few days later, it happened again, this time in my room. I had just turned my TV off after gaming for a few hours, when not even a minute later, my TV turns on by itself. And to make it worse, the TV in the living room turned on too at the same time. That was downright terrifying. I also honestly don't remember what I did after that. Maybe the anxiety is just blocking it all out, but I'll never forget that experience, with the TVs both unexplainably coming on like that simultaneously again. This didn't happen to me, but to my dad. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and my dad walks into the room, asking me if I'd used the bathroom in my parents' bedroom. I tell him no, and that I've been in my room the whole time. I could tell, though, that something was wrong when I saw the look of fear on his face. He told me that somebody was in the bathroom, and it wasn't my mum or my brother because they're asleep apparently. I asked him what he was talking about. He told me that he was going to use the bathroom but heard loud noises, so he stood by the door, which was open, but didn't walk in because he didn't understand what was going on. He said that he thought that for whatever reason someone was using the toilet with the door open, so he continued to wait by the door sort of confused. But then he said that he realized that it sounded like something different, and that it was too loud to be someone using the toilet, and that it sounded like someone was vomiting into the toilet because he heard splashing. Then he said that he heard the sound of a man gagging and clearing his throat, so he gets concerned and peeks into the bathroom, but nothing. The noises were gone and nobody was there. He said that he knew what he heard was real and that it was so real that he had to check behind the bathroom door just to make sure that no one had broke in. And then he checked the shower and he said that his jaw dropped because he saw soapy water and dirt all over the floor of the shower. He then says that he doesn't know how to explain what happened, and to be honest, neither do I. If anyone knows what this is about or has any other logical explanations, then I would genuinely love to hear it. I'm really not quite sure how to start this, so I'm just going to say it. I have some sort of an entity in my house that is getting more and more active, and I really don't know how to get it to stop. The lights in my bathroom flicker, even when I screw them in more. Lights in my bedroom have turned on and off by themselves, at the switch, mind you. I often see something in my peripheral. Whenever I look at it, it disappears, but it seems like it's wearing some kind of black robe, and I feel or hear 3 gentle taps on my temple every now and then, usually when I'm trying to fall asleep. It's unsettling having this much activity lately, since the activity had previously declined. A little bit of background. I live at home with my family. I'm in my childhood bedroom in the basement. When I was a teenager, I was really stupid, and at one point, 2018 if I had to guess, me and my friends held a seance with a Ouija board in my room. We had contact with something that called itself Jason. It told us things that we knew were lies, like that it died in this house, no previous owners mind you, and stuff like that. We said goodbye and thought that that was the end of it, kept the Ouija board in the hall closet. After that, there would be random cold spots in my room though. Like, you would be sweating from the space heater until you sat on the bed and it would be super cold. There was also a really uneasy feeling in the hall where the closet was. Then at some point, maybe 2021 I think, I started seeing this thing. It was like it used to be a woman, but there was black instead of a mouth and eyes, and it was smiling literally from ear to ear. I would always pretend that I didn't see it, walk past and go about my business. I eventually told my friends in 2023 about that creepy thing and explained how it was next to the Ouija board. We eventually made a plan to bury the board. I took the board to her place, she gave me some sage, and I tried to light it over the Ouija board, but the spring in the lighter shot straight out, leaving the lighter completely useless. I did get another lighter and lit it away from the board and cleansed the board. Then we talked about where to bury it. It was around this point that we saw a very young kid standing in the street just sort of staring at us. We went to see where his parents were, but as soon as we walked his way, he just ran. We watched him go into a house that my friend thought was abandoned, and my friend swears that he was a demon, but I think that she was just being paranoid. In any case, we left the board on the sidewalk to go and get some lunch because we were really stupid, and when we came back, you guessed it, it was gone. I figured at the time that since the board was out of my possession that I was safe, so I went home and cleansed my area very thoroughly. I stopped seeing that terrifying apparition, so I figured all was well, even though I still couldn't shake the being watched feeling. There are a lot of antiques in my home, so I figured that it's possible that something from one of those was watching. A lot of people who don't know about the Ouija incident have said that they feel like they're being watched or something isn't right in my room. I would just ignore it because it was just bugging me too much and I cleansed my room. Just an eerie feeling and a light flicker here and there. Seemed harmless enough, to be honest. But now, it's getting ridiculous. I'm having trouble sleeping because I'm seeing something moving around my bed and I wake up several times around 3 or 4 in the morning. And so my question for all of you guys is, what do I do? Any knowledge or advice or similar stories are greatly appreciated because, quite honestly, I'm just out of ideas. I'm going to cut to the chase and say that I don't believe in the supernatural. In fact, I've only ever had one unexplainable experience in my life, and I'm still trying to this day find a reasonable explanation for it. This story, it's been stuck in my head since I was a kid, and I start to tear up whenever I think about it. This was in the first house that I remember living in. I'm pretty sure that we were the first people living there as well, and it certainly wasn't old enough for someone to have died in it. I remember as a kid that I would regularly hear voices calling my name. The voices didn't sound like anyone that I know, but I would also see huge opaque shadows that would very quickly move across the hallway occasionally. And if this was all there was to it, I would just assume that this was a hallucination caused by a family history of mental illness or something like that. But I very vividly remember my aunt and cousins visiting our house, and I told one of my cousins, I believe that she was 13 at the time, about the weird shadows and how they would call my name. I showed her the hallway that this would take place in, and eventually, one of the shadows appeared and moved across the hallway while she was there with me. She jumped a little bit and just said, "Whoa," in that kind of tone that you would use when talking to a dog that's jumping on you. I remember hearing the voice and asking my cousin if she heard it too, but she said that she didn't. But nevertheless, she was super creeped out by the shadow. Neither of my parents nor my sibling remember this happening, but I remember it so vividly, and it was such a frequent occurrence that, honestly, I don't think that it could have been just a nightmare or a hallucination. So the year was 2018. Me and 3 other friends, we were all males in our early 20s, decided to travel to Bali for about a week since it was cheap and we had time, so why not? Our itinerary includes sightseeing, trying local foods, mountain climbing, visiting bars at the beach, basically a typical vacation in Indonesia. It was honestly quite a surreal experience too. The country is absolutely beautiful and the food was amazing. The only issue that I had about the trip were the locals. Drugs were really prominent there, especially shrooms. The streets were filled with users dying to sell us their drugs. I'm not exaggerating when I say this too, but one dude even grabbed my arm because I ignored his 2-for-1 deal for a one-way trip to meet Jesus apparently. I shrugged him off while my friends laughed it off, suggesting that I may be passing up a chance to meet our Lord and Savior. He looked rabid and frantic, like he was about to pounce onto me like a dog diagnosed with rabies or something. I didn't feel too afraid as we were confident that we could handle them since half of them were not even sober, but that is only the tip of the iceberg, let me tell you. The horror starts when we went back to our Airbnb for the night. You see, we had an early day the next morning and were pretty exhausted. The place was extremely cheap and didn't even have a proper locking mechanism for the door. It had 2 wooden doors which sort of swung inwards, and the only way to lock them was to wedge a wooden block through the holes mounted on the door. It was quite a primitive lock, but it got the job done, I suppose. Everything was going well too until the last night of our trip when we realized that the wooden block was now missing. We looked everywhere for it too, but to no avail. I just figured that one of us must have misplaced it somewhere. We settled for using a selfie stick. I know it sounds like a horrible idea. Instead, since we didn't have anything that fit the hole to wedge the door close. We turned in for the night, seemingly not expecting anything since we had already stayed there for 6 days with no issues. But I woke up to a strange clicking sound in the dead of the night. I got out of bed and I thought maybe it was one of the guys, so I sort of nonchalantly approached the noise. My friends were all sleeping, so I decided to investigate the cause of the noise. And the ruckus seemed to be coming from the door, so I headed towards them feeling extremely confused. I mean, who could be at our doorstep at this time of the night? I noticed the doors were slightly opened, and the selfie stick was horribly deformed at this point. I peeked outside, and that was when I saw 3 people staring through the gap between the doors. They were really close to the entrance and were attempting to push the doors open. I instantly yelled at them, questioning their intentions, as I noticed one of them was holding the wooden block. I was shocked and puzzled at the situation as I recognized one of the men. He did the overall cleaning for the Airbnbs and pathways during the day, so there was really no reason for him to be there at 3 a.m. The other dude asked if the wooden block belonged to us, as they allegedly found it outside of our Airbnb. I definitely smelt lies at this point, as there was absolutely no reason to do that at 3 in the morning. I called for my guys, and the 3 men immediately ran for it at this point. I clued in the guys on the circumstances, and we stayed up until morning, just in case they tried anything funny. We decided to report this to the reception, though, about their employee, but the description that I gave them, they apparently were not synonymous with theirs. They told me that the housekeepers that they hired consisted only of females in their late 30s and 40s. This instantly sent shivers down our spines as we came to realize that we had let a complete imposter in and out of our rooms while we were out. Luckily, nothing important was lost, and we got out of the situation safely, but that does beg the question, why didn't they steal anything? I must admit that I was grateful that it was our last night there, because I really don't know how I would have gone spending another night in that place. I work in the woods for a living here in the western US, lately as a fire lookout in a remote location. I'm talking a 3-mile hike to a mostly abandoned dirt road and another hour drive before you even hit pavement. This was last summer. It was around 11 p.m. on a moonless night, pitch black outside, and the lights of the town 30 miles away have mostly dimmed at this point. It was a relatively calm night, very little wind. The tower sits atop a more or less bald spot, atop a lower peak in the middle of a burn scar. There's really not much in the immediate area, besides some long grass and a smattering of younger fir trees. And at around 11 p.m, I'm sitting there under the glow of a propane light out on the porch, finishing a book. I suddenly hear a rustling coming from down the hill to the south, maybe about 20 degrees down from where I was sitting. It was just barely audible and sounded like it was maybe 300 feet away. It was very sudden and sent a shiver up my spine, but I went back inside, grabbed my flashlight to have a look around from the catwalk. There was nothing at all out there in that direction that I could immediately detect. But then I saw it. Well, I saw something. To this day, I'm really still not certain what it was, to be honest, but what I do know is that it wasn't a trick of the light or my eyes or anything. I looked at that exact spot the next few nights and never saw it again, but I know my home like the back of my hand. Every tree, every shrub. This was not that. Out in the distance, next to a lone boundary tree, was a vague shape, dark and ill-defined, despite the surrounding area being relatively in focus. It looked to be about maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, roundish, definitely wider than the tree, roughly human-shaped, but not quite right, like it was some memory of what a human looks like from someone who hasn't seen another one in a long time. It was hunched over, and I watched it for what felt like forever. It didn't move, not initially, but after a bit, it shifted slowly to my right behind the tree, and then it was gone, and I never saw it again. Now, the weird thing is that I should have been able to see it behind the skinny tree, and if it went down the hill or the side of the hill, I would have seen it. Like I said, this relatively small snag was on its own, on a relatively gentle downslope, so the fact that it just sort of went around the tree and disappeared like that just doesn't make any sense. Now, this is an area with a lot of animals, mostly white-tailed deer and wild cows. We have some black bears, some elk, some cougars, and even some wolves, but they don't tend to let themselves be seen, and they tend to skitter off when they learn that they're being observed as well. I've seen the predators before, but never that close to my tower. The whitetails and the elk come up, but there's little in terms of food. People are known to come here from time to time, but it's really rare. We also have visitors and hunters, but my location in particular is only really known to locals and doesn't exist on public maps or anything. The official start of the extremely overgrown, hard to follow, and obviously abandoned trail is about 2 miles after a locked and unmarked gate. Hunters, they don't tend to come up here because the animals don't tend to come too close. Poachers wouldn't because they're aware that we report to law enforcement. So all of this is to say that I have no idea what that was, but boy, did it freak me out. It still freaks me out a little to this day even, and I really hope that it was just a person or an animal in some weird circumstance, but I'm not so sure about that. What I do know is that I don't feel too comfortable sitting outside after dark here anymore. Through my life, I've had several experiences that could be considered paranormal, but due to my personality traits, I'm not good at sharing stuff like this. I'm an atheist, and I sort of believe in paranormal events, I guess. I mean, at least they're a possibility in my mind. But for me, the paranormal is something that we can interact with, or it can interact with us for different reasons, and it has been described to me a bit like a receptor for that something that might be there. That being said, here's my experience. So a few years ago, I was living in this old apartment. It was in good shape, but you can easily tell how old it was by just looking at it. During all my time there, I always felt this, I don't know, like bad vibes, I guess. And I had several experiences there. One of them happened during the night. I was sleeping in a king-size bed with my girlfriend. We always slept in the middle of the bed, and as you know, a king bed is quite a wide bed. At some point during the night, I started to wake up, and as I recall, I was in this waking up moment when you can't tell if you're still sleeping or sort of already awake. But I just had this feeling of someone else was in the room with us. And as I was opening my eyes, I felt like I fell out of bed, just harder, like I wasn't pushed from it, but thrown from it. I opened my eyes and found myself about maybe 3 or 4 feet from my bed, and my girlfriend was in a panic, looking at me, asking how the heck I got there and what was that loud sound. Me hitting the floor, apparently. But I look at my arm, and it had some kind of mark that you get when something grabs you hard. It was like a hand mark, just way bigger than my own. Putting the marks aside though, to this day I try to think on how I possibly was able to do what I did that night. How I was able to just fling myself out of the bed like that. Like I said, it was a king-size bed, so to be honest, it just seems impossible. And it wasn't like my girlfriend could throw me out of the bed like that. I'm just too big for her to do that. I really don't know what to believe about this, because I just haven't come up with a good explanation yet. I was 16 when this first happened, and it occurred around January, just after Christmas. My family went on vacation, and they left me in the house with my dad, and my mum and sisters were on vacation with my aunts. We didn't hire a house sitter to watch over the house because of previous house sitter robberies, so me and my dad and I were the only ones left home. It was Thursday, maybe around 9 o'clock. I liked staying up at night, plus my dad wasn't home, his work shift was extended. But it was at around that time that something weird happened. I think it was around 9:30, and I recall that my dog was scratching the door, so I fixed his collar and walked him out to do his business while watching him. And I remember seeing a vaguely strange man walking through the suburban streets, and at first I didn't really mind him and was back to doing my business, but at around like maybe 9:45, 15 minutes later, I was going back inside when I saw another man walking again while closing the door. He seemed to be walking a bit more slowly, and if I can recall correctly, I think it was the same man walking from before. So after I took care of my dog, I was planning to go to sleep, But something about me seeing that guy just, I don't know, it got to me and kept me up. So instead I decided to stay up until 10 to see if he would come back, but really didn't see anything at that time, so in the end I just went back to going to sleep. At around 11 or 12 though, something like that, I just randomly woke up to my dad calling me. He was wondering if I was still awake, and of course I wasn't. I was a little bit irritated because I was already asleep, and why would he call at such a time as this? But while we were talking, my eye slowly turned over to the window, and there he was, the same man again, but he was just standing there, leaning at the lamppost, and I think now he was smoking. When I rubbed my eyes, I saw that it was the same man from before, so I was a little bit surprised, but I didn't tell my dad about the man on the phone. After the convo, though, with my dad on the phone, I went downstairs to peek if the front door was locked. It was, but I just felt a little bit uneasy at the time. I went back upstairs and peeked through my window. The man was still there staring, looking at the house, and I could feel that he knew that I was staring at him. I didn't go back to sleep too because of that. I had a bad feeling, so I grabbed the baseball bat that my little brother was using for baseball practice and kept it beside me. I was stressing out like anything at that time and was shaking softly, but I wanted to call 911, but I was afraid that I'd only waste my time by reporting something that I don't really have clear evidence on. And right at that moment, I can still remember that day too, when he started to brisk walk up to my house, and I immediately just jumped up and went into fight or flight mode. I raced downstairs to stay there, and when I heard the knocks, I immediately called my dad and told him to check his Ring doorbell camera, and he saw the man too. He was a little confused at first and thought that me and my friends were pulling a prank on him, but when he started knocking, I just hung up on him and started going back downstairs carefully. When I arrived at the front door, I stood there, holding the bat really tight, and asked who was there. He then spoke, and he said that he was a solicitor for, I don't know, some solicitor from someplace. But I mean, who knocks at like 12 in the morning? So I asked him to get away from our property kindly, but he just wouldn't leave. After a few minutes, my dad sent me a screenshot of the man at our front door, and in full caps said, "Who is that?" I just ignored the message. I was guarding the front door. He started knocking on the door more vigorously and aggressively, and I clutched the bat ready to swing. I heard another notification on my phone. I checked later, and it was my dad saying that he was coming home to check on me. But the man, at that moment, started kicking on the door, and it was aggressive. I tried telling him to leave angrily, but he ignored it and kept on continuing. After a few seconds, he stopped, and I checked my upstairs bedroom window and see that he was sprinting away from the house and saw headlights entering the driveway. I was struck with relief when I saw my dad coming out of the pickup. After that, he called 911 and told them about the incident and hung up. We posted his face on social media for awareness, but in the end, that's really all that happened. The guy never returned, thankfully, but still, the whole thing definitely had me shook up for quite some time. So, things have gotten a bit crazy with my girlfriend's sleeping problems. I've been seeing this girl a little under a year. It's a great relationship. I think I'm going to marry her, in fact. But she sleepwalks, and I always find her standing at the door, not going in it or not, just standing still there. She also has a 4-year-old son who I adore, and vice versa. But honestly, he has woken up at 2:11 on the dot the past month every single night, crying and wanting to come into bed with us. One night, he woke up screaming and crying worse than normal. He will always stand at the threshold of our door crying for one of us to come and get him, and he will not cross the threshold under any circumstance unless we physically come and pick him up. Side note too, We leave the room open all day and he is in and out of there all day, so it's a bit strange. But anyway, the other night, he woke up at 2:11 like usual, but the only difference is when I picked him up to lay with us, he claimed that there was a man in the corner. I checked, even though I could see that there wasn't. I did it to comfort him because I could see the said corner and tell that there was nothing there. But then he insisted that we go out of the room until the man in the corner was gone. The whole time he had a look of terror on his face, and I just have no idea what to do about any of this. Also, a couple of times I've woken up to my girlfriend pointing at the corner of the room. I don't know if the two things are related, but it seems a bit fishy, that's for sure. I, a 25-year-old female, work graveyard shift at a nursing facility. It's essentially a residential home for those who are nearing the end of their life, who've gone into transition or are in hospice. The first place I've ever worked where it feels so incredibly alive, despite the residents being so close to the end. But when I first started, I saw things before I heard about it. On my first night, I saw a shadowy woman's silhouette pass behind my coworker, who was talking to me, and disappear into the closed bathroom door. In front of the bathroom door is the main exitway, which is wired with an alarm that you need a code to get into. The door itself is heavy too. Think the automatic doors you see in the hospitals. The door alarm was tripped at around 2 a.m, so thinking that a resident might have wandered, we ran from the nurse's station to reset the alarm and get them back into bed. Except when we got there, the door was wide open and the alarm shut off once we got close to it. We did a head count and every single resident on that floor was asleep and accounted for. We eventually were able to laugh about it until the next morning first shift came in and warned me about the uninvited guests that stay on campus. Since then, I've had a plethora of experiences there. The most common phenomena is the man in black and the woman in white, as well as the kids in the courtyard. Apparently the man in black is a benign thing and he usually pops up at around the time that people are about to expire. Our lead nurse thinks that he guides people to the afterlife and takes away the good ones. Then there's the woman in white. She's apparently of some evil origin. Certain residents who are about to expire report that they see her in their rooms, days leading up to their expiration. They say that her presence is accompanied by a feeling of being set on fire or burning, and there's a theory that this woman in white drags you to whatever the bad place is in the afterlife. One of our hospice patients passed away very recently, in fact, and just before she did, one of our nurses reported that she felt a tall, dark, shadowy figure come up close behind her. When she turned her head, there was nothing there, so we can only hope that the patient went to the good place with the man in black. I have many more stories. Mostly I need to tell them so that I can finally put them out of my mind and possibly get some input on what this activity could be, but I'll save those for another time. For now, this will have to do. A few years ago, I was at the grocery store and I had finished up and was walking down the center aisle toward the checkouts at the front. Up ahead, standing in the middle of the aisle with his back to the display, facing the produce, was an older man. Normal looking, normally dressed, maybe 60-ish I would guess. Looked like he was just standing there waiting for someone too. I looked at him as I walked toward him and he slowly turned his head toward me, and I swear that he had completely solid black eyes, even the whites of the eyes where they should be. I instantly felt this immense fear and dread. I turned my cart to the right and started running down the aisle behind the greeting cards, like seriously running. I was terrified because it just did not look natural. He didn't do anything, didn't move, just looked at me, but I eventually made it up the front checkout and left. I had never before or since experienced something like that, and I'm 45 now. Especially that feeling of dread that I got. I mean, I'm a people person. I probably looked like a dork walking around the grocery smiling at people, but hey, that's just me. And if he had been normal looking, I would have smiled and said hi. I've only ever found a couple of stories online that were somewhat similar. Lots of stuff about children with black eyes, but not adults. The story that I've seen about the guy at the rest stop was most similar to what I experienced, especially the dread. And I'm just wondering, has anybody else experienced something like this? Or are there any diseases or anything that could have caused something like this? If you have any ideas, then I would love to hear them.